Good morning and welcome to the second and final day of Teaching Philippine Queer Literature. We hope that our speakers and our participants had a good night's sleep. Before we proceed, we are once again reminding everyone of our house rules. Please turn off your mic during presentations. You may type in your concerns using the chat box. As much as possible, please turn on your cameras to foster a livelier atmosphere. Questions will be entertained during the Q&A portion, which will be held before lunch and at the end of the day. Yesterday, we went back to basics and discussed individual and communal experiences of queerness. This morning, we are going further into how the queer experience factors into our social consciousness. We are starting with history. Our history has been heavily colonized and is largely heteronormative. So we are shining a light on the act of queering history. Our speaker, Dr. Romulo Baquiran Jr., will discuss more about it.
Magandang umaga sa inyo. Sana nakatulog kayo ng maayos at nakapagbasa. Bago magsimula, gusto ko kayong batiin ng Happy World Human Rights Day. No? Kasama ang mga queer dito sa pagsusulong ng karapatang pantao. Lalo na tayo sa sektor natin na sinama ko na lahat. Kailangan ipaglaban natin, kailangan igiit ang ating mga karapatan bilang sektor. No? At ito nga sa pamamagitan ng ating pag-aaral dito ay masimulan kahit sa klase nag-uumpisa at palabas ng komunidad. No? Kaya nga itong aking paksa ay napaka-relevant kasi kahit sa ating pamilya, wala tayong mabalikan na model na di ba sa family, wala namang andun lang yung nanay at tatay, wala tayong matitingala na figura ng bakla sa pamilya, no? Kasi ito nga ay naisasantabi o nabubura, no? Kahit sa malaking larangan ng historia, kasaysayan, maganda yung Filipino ng katumbas ba ng history, kasi history medyo ando kagad yung his sa atin, kasaysayan, saysay o halaga ng nakaraan. Meron muna tayong panonoorin na clip sa YouTube na mula sa episode na Katipunan ni Lord de Vera, pretty much na encapsule yung mga kailangan nating pag-isipan tungkol sa history in general, plus ganun din sa history ng queerness o queer o ng bakla, homosexual sa Pilipinas. So panoorin muna natin ito.
Kaduda, duda. A. Nag-cross-dress sila once upon a time para makaiwas sa checkpoint ng mga sundalong Espanyol. B. Lahat daw ng mga lalaki ay nakakulong sa isang kwarto habang ang mga ladies ay nagpaparty sa balkonahe. C. Ang favoritism ni Aguinaldo sa batang-bata at gwapong si Gregorio del Pilar. Nakapink ko. Si Danton Remoto ay kilalang gay rights activist at eksperto sa kasaysayan ng third sex sa Pilipinas. Isang award-winning na manunulat, propesor at chairperson ng Ladlad Party List. Isa sa mga common strategies raw ng mga revolusyonaryo no, ay magdamit babae.
Yes. Di ba strategy naman yan talaga ng mga revolusyonaryo, yung mga bata, mga courier, matatanda, at saka mga babae. So, sa Balanggiga Massacre nga, di ba nakasuot sila ng babae?
Iba-ibang sabihin si Rizal at iba pang propagandista, bading din porket nakadamit babae.
Tawa kami ng tawa kasi may mga picture si Ambet si Rizal talagang yung posing nila nung bago mag-painting ng The Death of Cleopatra, no? Talagang parang ang labot-labot ng kamay niya, parang umaarte hindi naman. Parang gano'n, ano?
Eksperto naman sa usapin ng katipunan at revolusyon sa bansa, si Xiao Chua. At ayon sa kanya, mabibilang lamang ang mga dokumento na nasulat patungkol sa mga bakla.
Ang tanging record na may pinakamalapit doon sa tinatawag na binabae ay noong tinatawag na Cry of Balintawak, August 24, 1896. Yung iba, naka-record doon, nakalusot sila sa mga napakaraming Espanyol na nagbabantay sa buong Maynila kasi nagsuot sila ng pambabae. Cross-dressing ito upang makarating sila doon sa pulong na ipinatawag ng Supremo.
Oh, nakadamit babae lang, bakla na agad. Bakit ang mga to? Oh. Pero mukhang di yata pwede lumusot ito sa ibang eksperto. Gaya ni Dr. Luis Deri, presidente ng Philippine Historical Association.
It's possible na maraming bakla at whether nag-cross-dress sila, I do not know. Malabo yan. Kasi nagsisimula tayo sa chismis At ang history ay hindi chismis. Si Ambit Ocampo lang ang chismoso.
Susunod. Pero ano to? Isang dokumento mula 1896 na may mababasang salitang bakla? At mamaya, bakit ilang dula tungkol sa katipunerong Becky? Teka muna. Pag-usapan nga natin ang salitang bakla.
Ang ibig sabihin niya, nung panahon ng Espanyol ay pagka sinabi mong nabakla, umuwaw ka. O hindi ka sigurado. O paiba-iba ang isip mo. Yun yung nabakla.
In fact, mababasa raw salitang bakla sa Pasyong Tagalog noong 19th century. Pero ang spelling ay ganito. Imbis sa K, C. At may linya pa nga raw na nagsabi na si Cristo raw ay nabakla. Pero ang ibig sabihin nun ay si Cristo ay nalito nung sa agonias sa hardin o agony in the garden. Hindi ganun karami ang nasusulat tungkol sa mga bakla sa revolusyon. Pero nakakakiliti sa isipan ang isang artikulo ng historiador na si Ambeth Ocampo na Gays in the Philippine Revolution. May isang makulay na tauhan na binanggit dito.
Ito si Baldomero de Leon din, nakasuot ng babae, may dalang bayong at saka sigarilyo, bilao, at saka bayong ng sigarilyo, ng asin, ng asukal tumatawid sa American military lines.
Imposible nga namang nung ika-20 siglo lang nagkaroon ng mga bakla sa Pilipinas, di ba? Pero ang tanong, bakit halos walang makitang mga kasulatan tungkol sa mga bading nung panahong yun?
Wala akong nadaanan sa mga dokumento sa Philippine Insurgent Records na binabanggit ang bakla.
Maliban sa isang ito, isang dokumento ng katipunan ng kanilang minutes of the meeting noong Agosto 12, 1896, may naisulat na salitang nakababakla. Pero, ayon kay Xiao, siguradong wala itong konotasyon ng romansa ng lalaki sa kapwa lalaki. Pero, nga kaya?
Hindi natin dinidiscount. Maaring may mga katipunero na minamahal nila ang isa't isa. At hindi lang ito pagmamahal bilang kapatiran, kundi bilang romantic love. Pero kung sila yung may relasyon na ganito, hindi nila ito isusulat dahil ito ay isang kahihiyan. Itatago na nila yon. Kaya napipi yung kasaysayan nila dyan.
Kalahating lalaki lang siya.
Sa pananaw naman ni Dr. Luis Derry, simple lang daw ang paraan para iresolba ang mga isyu sa kasaysayan, ebidensya.
May posibilidad na marami. Lamang, ang problema kasi sa history, no, sa pagsulat ng kasaysayan, hindi mo maaaring sabihin may mga bakla sa katipunan sa pagtulak ng dokumento. So, ang mangyayari niyan ay by inference. I-infer mo na lang na ginagalang ang bakla sa lipunang Pilipino bago dumating ang mga Kastila. Hindi malayo na may mga bakla na sumali.
Pero kung halos wala nga mahanap na ebidensya na merong bading sa katipunan, nako, sa imahinasyon ng ilang manunulat, walang pwedeng pumigil.
Ayun, pretty much andyan yung problema ng pagtalakay sa pagtukoy ng bakla sa history. Parang andun na kung pakinggan natin yung mismo historian, si Professor Derry, mahusay siyang historian. Pero halatang halata yung kanya, kahit si Xiao Chua, halatang halata yung homophobia sa kanilang pananaw. Unaware sila doon, di ba? Parang natural lang na binanggit nila na si Professor Derry, sinuyod daw niya yung mga records ng insurgent records. Precisely kasi hindi naman niya hinahanap yung kabaklaan. Paano mo makikita yung isang phenomenon kung di mo naman siya hinahanap? At hindi consciously binabasa yung mga teksto. Yun nga, parang sabi, mai-infer lang. At saka kahit mismo si Xiao Chua, by inference lang lagi, walang katulad ng mga diary. Kasi sa history, laging hinahanap yung ebidensya. Dapat may dokumento, nakasulat, malinaw, mahal ko si ganyan, pareho silang lalaki. O kaya autobiography na umami ng isang o kaya binanggit ng ibang tao na walang primary source, laging tawag dito inference. At saka mismo yung attitude ng historian o nagre-research dahil hindi sila bakla o wala silang sympathy dito, ay di ba sinabi mismo ni Xiao Chua, nakakahiya. That very term prevents kagad yung possibility o yung mga teksto na pwedeng mabasahan. Katulad lamang, maliban lamang sa mga friendly katulad ni Miss La Chica from UP Iloilo, sa research niya, ay nabanggit si Lampino na sumali sa, ito yung pinaka-earliest name na babaylan na sumali sa revolusyon ni Dagohoy at ni Tamblot, yung mga katulad nito. So kung babalikan natin yung history, kahit tulad sa family, parang ang hirap humanap ng model para sa isang magandang positibong pagtingin. In fact, yung ating organizer, yung ating convener dito sa GlobalGRACE, si Dr. Neil Garcia, ay nagbanggit ng isang tingin ko ay napaka-revolutionary na claim noong 1990s nung nagsisimula siya sa career na ito. O hindi lang career, talagang totoong buhay na niya, yung kanyang sa kanyang pamimilosopiya. Sa palagay ko, pamimilosopiya na kasi yung ating natanggap na heteronormative na galing sa Biblia, halimbawa, galing sa religion, ay kiniklaim ni Dr. Garcia na posible o talaga na ang Diyos mismo ay isang bakla. So, nung marinig ko yung statement na yun noong 1990s, nagulat ako kasi wala sa hinagap ko na ang tingin kasi natin sa Diyos talaga ay macho, di ba? may makapal na bigote, may makapal na balbas, tapos maraming ulap sa paligid, may hawak na parang si Zeus na nasa langit at alam lahat, alam ang lalaking lalaki siya, at ginawa niya ang mundo na dalawa lang, babae at lalaki. So, nung mabanggit ni Dr. Garcia yung statement na yon, God is gay, So parang oo nga naman, bakit hindi, 'di ba? Parang yung positive, yung positibong pagtanaw sa mitolohiya, sa history ay dapat hindi discount yung possibility na ito. Kasi kung ang reasoning is kung ginawa ng Diyos ang lahat, pati ang bakla, ay hindi dapat ito tignan as derogatory sa mababang paraan. So sa ganong pagpapalit ng ideolohiya ay kasama dito yung history, no? So yun nga, sa atin kasi bilang kolonyal na kasaysayan, parang naiisip laging ang participants sa revolution ay mga lalaki at babae, Tandang Sora, mga si Andres Bonifacio, Gregoria de Jesus, nasaan ng asa ng bakla, Pero buti na lamang may lumitaw na record, consistency Baldomero de Leon. Marami sila, di ba? Nabanggit kanina na kahit may isang historian na may sympathizer siya. Hindi ko lang maalala ngayon, nasa UP. Sa research niya, ito nagmula yung mga cross-dressers na katipuneros para isulong yung revolusyon ay lumitaw. So napaka magandang malaman yun, na may mga baklang figura tayong mababalikan sa history. Pero yun nga, ang tendency kasi ay tulad nga mismo, sabi nitong mga historian mismo, ay hindi pinapansin, binubura, pinagtatawanan, kahit mismo yung ating pinakabida dito sa module, si Baldomero de Leon, ay yung mga Amerikano nung nahuli siya, gulat na gulat yung mga sundalong Amerikano. Nahuli siya kasi noong 1899, At hindi makapaniwala yung mga nandun sa station sa Santa Ana na lalaki ba ito? So inano siya, parang niridicule, pinagtawanan, hinugad-hugaran, and we don't know ano pang ginawa na nakagaguhan ng mga Amerikano sa kanya. Maliit lang kasing balita yon sa Manila Times noong August 1899, kasagsagan ng Filipino-American War. At itong figure na ito ang paulit-ulit na lumilitaw nandito sa mga plays na ginawa ng mga writers, kahit kay Amelia La Peña Bonifacio, sa kanyang play ay lumitaw na yung isang katipunero ay nag-cross-dress. So ito yung ating nababalikan figura. Kasi nga may burado yung ebidensya, lagi lang tayong mag-infer. Oo, yan. Okay, naglingkod na espiya. Ayun nga parang bakit ganon? Bilang siguro magtuturo tayo ng mga, wala tayo talagang makikitang mahabang historical text na maituturo sa ating mga estudyante. Para ma-recuperate. Ito yung ating mga pegs dito sa pagtuturo ng history. Recuperate, narrativize. Ito lang naman ay pagsasalba, itong mga termino ito. Muling pagkukwento, muling pagsasalaysay. Ang pinaka-keyword actually ay reimagination. Kasi ang literature, itong ating larangan, ang isa sa mga portal para mabago itong pagtingin na ito. Ang mga writers katulad na ating mga babasahin mamaya tatalakayin ay precisely walang mabalikan na aktual na figura, na ating matitingala, masisimulan ng paglalarawan ng bakla sa kasaysayan. Kaya ang ginawa ay nitong dekada 21st century, maraming mga writers, kabataan, nasa kanilang 18 bago nasa college, yung ating tatlong manunulat na tatalakayin mamaya. Sa history nga, napakahirap nga, si Pulong, pwede rin nating balikan, very may visual kasi, may mga retrato siyang balikan. Pwede nating talakayin sa klase itong mga figurang positibo sa kasaysayan. May isa pa ang kanina nabanggit, may dalawang major figure na pagsuspetsahang bakla. Hindi pa rin natin masasabing ating mga bayani ay may bayani tayong bakla, chismis lamang. May paliwanag dito. Si Rizal nabanggit na lalambot-lambot doon sa picture, nakadamit babae, nagko-cross-dress doon sa painting. And then si Aguinaldo mismo, ang height, ang tawag dito, icon ng kamachuhan ng revolusyon, di ba? Pinagsuspetsahang bakla kasi bakit niya pinili si Gregorio del Pilar na pogi at bata at gwapo, na wala namang karanasan sa military science o campaign, so chinichismis, yun nga, hirap, chismis lamang yung history, na ano pa si Ambet Ocampo, may konting pasaring yung kapwa niya historian, di ba? Yung comment na yon ay ang daming loaded yung comment ng istorya na ito, kasi sabi niya si Ambet Ocampo lang ang chismoso, Loaded yon. Bakit? Kasi alam niya na si Ambet ay medyo hindi naman natin siya i-out, pero mukhang alam ni Professor Derry na may tendency o talagang si Ambet ay gano'n. So parang may derision doon sa comment. Wala na, baka sensitive lang tayo, pero may ganong dating. And then dapat ba tayo makipag-away sa mga ganito? Posible siguro kailangan din natin i-take into responsibility itong mga toxic macho figures, na sila ay mama-question. Tawag dito, nasa na ba ako? Ayun, si Aguinaldo, meron ding nabanggit ito sa isang kanilang family reunion in the 60s. Although hindi natin talaga mapatunayan. At baka pupunta na ako sa chismis, pero maganda ring alam niyo doon sa isang family reunion clan, mayroon daw isang sumigaw na kamag-anak. Sabi, alam niyo naman bakla yan si Lolo, ganyan. Crush niya si Gregorio, parang gano'n. In other words, ito yung source ng chismis ni Lord de Vera. It's a family reunion na pina-out yung kanilang lolo. Ayan. Ganyan yung mga issue sa history, and then si Rizal mismo, bakit tawag diyan? Isang chismis, hindi natin alam kung chismis, pero meron namang basic historical fact na baka yung anak niya kay Josephine Bracken ay hindi rin naman niya anak, Kasi itong si Josephine Bracken ay dating alaga ng isang Irish na old man, So maganyan yung mga issue barating. Pero yun nga, to rin naman yung sabi ng historian, ito ay mga walang documented source na masasabi. Pero umiikot-ikot, alam niyo naman natin ating kultura, sabi ni Dr. Garcia, ay oral, laging, yun nga siguro problema natin sa ating, hindi man problema yung fact ng ating culture, hindi tayo mahilig bilang masyado yata malaking claim.
Joey,
Yes.
oh, I think that yung kay Rizal, kasi ako nga yung gumawa ng pag-aaral sa well, it was really a way to take seriously, no, the question that was raised by Isagani Cruz in his column, no. Meron siyang kasing column na ang kanyang untitled bakla ba si Rizal, at sabi niya bakla nga. I've been muted, sandali. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Oo. So nung ginawan ko siya ng research, na laman ko na ang very clear thing na pwede nating hindi pag-awayan ay yung version na nakuha natin of Rizal actually has been more or less censored, no, by historians who suppressed some evidence or some documents about Rizal na would have complicated our understanding or idea of him as a person. Kasi nga, may hagiography ang nationalist celebration or extolling of Rizal as the foremost hero, no? Kaya siya father of the Filipino nation, si Rizal. So, na-simplify yung understanding natin ni Rizal when in fact, going by his own textual production, he was more complicated. So, for example, natuklasan ko na may isang notebook sa Newberry Library sa Chicago ni Rizal na na-describe na ng mga historians kung ano yung content noon. Kasi nung centennial ng birth ni Rizal noong 1961, binigyan ng pera ang National Historical Commission, binigyan ng gobyerno ang National Historical Commission on the centennial to basically print all the material that was available that Rizal wrote, no? So yung notebook na yon, may mga sinulat si Rizal na mga annotations doon, yung mga textualidad na nandun, na nailabas na, nailimbag na nung Centennial Commission na yon, at hindi na isama yung mention man lang na hindi lang teksto or mga salita ang nasa notebook, kundi marami rin drawings. At ang interesting thing, meron siyang drawings doon ng male genitalia na hindi natin nalaman na meron pala, no? At ang maganda sa male genitalia ay iba-iba ang pinanggalingan ng mga genitalia kasi marami. Tapos lahat sila more or less semi-erect or erect. At of course, interesting yun. Isipin mo, bakit kailangan i-suppress yung descript yung mention na may ganun palang drawing si Rizal? Doktor naman siya, pwede naman siya may interest talaga sa anatomy, di ba? So, nag-drawing siya ng maraming nota. Of course, tanungin mo, bakit walang vagina, puro penis lang? Yun ang tanong, di ba? Bakit ganon? Bakit kung may mga pasyente siya, tsaka, di ba ano siya? Pero hindi, pwede rin naman na interested siya sa genitals kahit na doktor siya ng mata. Pagkat nung panahon na nagpa-practice siya ng ophthalmology sa Europe, usong-uso sa Europe ang syphilis. At ang syphilis ay one of the late symptoms of syphilis has to do with vision loss. Siguro pag may nagpupunta sa kanya mga pasyente na lumalabo ang mata at may mga sores na syphilitic sa mata, una niya tinitingnan kung genital ba or venereal ba ang source nito. So tini-examine niya yung genital area. It doesn't matter kung ano man ang rason na yon, dapat nalaman natin na may ganun pala siyang ginawa. Kasi ang mandate ng Centennial Commission na yon ay alamin at ipaalam kung ano-ano ang mga tekstualidad ni Rizal. Kasama na dapat yung mga drawings na yon. So isa lang example yan ng kung paano na custom or na tailor-made ang image natin of Rizal, no? Na natanggal more or less yung complexity niya kasi merong ang mold na pinapasok siya doon, no? Pine-force siya doon sa mold na yon ng ating nationalist historians, no? At yung tanong ko yung tanong ni Isagani Cruz, paklabat si Rizal, ang translate ko as was Rizal gay, at ang sagot ko ay it was a question that wouldn't have made sense to him. Kasi nga kung natatandaan niyo yung review ng concepts ni Dr. Baitan kahapon, sexuality is a social construction in the same way that gender is, no? At wala namang gay person without the description of what gay is. In other words, kung wala yung salita at konsepto, wala rin yung katauhan na yun. So ano ang meron noong panahon ni Rizal? May lalaki at babae at nagsisimula pa lang noon sa Europe ang homosexuality as a discourse na hindi masyado nakaka-apekto sa kanya kasi nung pumunta siya sa Europe, fully formed na siya eh. So merong mga identity noon na binabae sa Pilipinas, may bayogin, may asog, yung mga ating gender crossing identities. Pero hindi natin more or less ma-relate yun kay Rizal, no? Pagkat wala naman tayong evidence na he ever thought of himself as gender transitive in any way, no? But anyway, I think the article is there, no, Joey, na pwede nating isama sa pack nila, no? Yung aking essay, Was Rizal Gay, na naging interesting siya, thought experiment nga, di ba? Isipin natin, if we can impute a a category like gay transhistorically to someone like Rizal. And my answer is it wouldn't be a productive question for him, no? We can ask him other kinds of questions that would be productive, but not that, because that is gayness is a historically specific truth, no? Na hindi natin pwede ilabas sa konteksto ng diskurso na nag-produce ng ganyang katauhan, no? So isipin natin na sa buong mundo, even before the discourse of homosexuality, merong mga lalaki nakikipagtalik at na-attract sa kapwa lalaki at babae na na-attract sa kapwa babae, pero hindi homosexuality ang way of understanding what it was. Iba-iba. Bawat kultura may sarili silang valuation at pagtanaw at pag-make sense ng ganoong katauhan. So palagi ko sa Pilipinas, kung isipin mo kasi mga Kastila nabaliw nung pumunta dito kasi wala tayong sexual scruples, di ba? Nakikipagtalik yung ating mga ninuno sa labas. Wala talaga masyadong, sexually innocent tayo, para tayong mga bata, di ba? So alam natin na hindi issue yon, hindi kinlasify ng sinaunang Pilipino ang mga tao according to sexual orientation. Meron silang pagpananaw ng lalaki at babae at mga bayog, bayogin, asog, yung mga identity, mga binalaki, mga ganyan, no? Lakinon, bayot, okay? Agi, yung mga terms natin na yan, mga local terms yan, that actually bespeak complexity in terms of understanding gender identities, na may binary man na male-female, may dualismo naman na ganon, meron ding room for alternative embodiments at multiple embodiments. Hindi lang pwede i-boil down to lalaki at babae. So, yun lang, Joey, medyo napahaba. Pasensya na. At
okay lang, oo. Salamat, oo. Kasi andito yung, salamat at nandito ka, Basically, hindi natin pwedeng i-impute kay Rizal ang kabaklaan. Kasi iba naman yung konsepto nun.
Oo.
Wala pa ang konsepto ng bakla noong 19th century na tinuturing natin ngayon ng pakahulugan.
Maganda i-familiarize ang ating sariling realidad ngayon by thinking outside it and going to an earlier time in history or going to an alternative culture na iba ang pag-make sense ng realidad, di ba? So, maraming sa anthropology, iba't iba ang mga sex-gender systems na nakita nila sa iba't ibang lugar ng mundo. Ngayon, ang problema, because of globalization, nagiging parang uniform na ang ating diskurso sa sexualidad at gender. At aminin na natin, kasama na LGBTQ sa symptom na uniform na nga. Kasi sa buong mundo, marami nang tinatawag sa sarili nilang queer, marami nang tinatawag sa sarili nilang LGBTQ, so nagiging uniform na nga, no? Ang aking pananaw dyan ay kahit na nakikita natin ang mga salitang queer at lesbian at trans sa buong iba-ibang part sa mundo, sa bawat konteksto na meron mang ganitong salita, iba pa rin ang laman noong salitang yun pagkat translation ang nangyayari. So pag sinabi natin halimbawa trans sa Pilipinas, no? Trans woman, pasok sa trans woman yung bakla. At ang maraming mga current day trans women na trans Pinay natin would have had bakla at childhoods. Wala naman yata akong maisip ng mga adult trans identifying Filipino trans women na nung bata pa lang sila ay trans na sila. Nung bata sila, bakla sila. Yun ang tukso sa kanila sa playground, no, sa neighborhood nila. At kahit na sabihin mo ayoko na yung salitang yun to describe myself, what we were called as children, the shame that we felt actually still has some kind of influence on our sense of self. At kasama yon dapat sa ating intindi sa kasaysayan ng ating self. Even the shameful affect, no, na nire-reject natin, and by our embracing of other words right now, no, kasama dapat yon sa ating pag-appreciate, no, sa ating personal history. O kahit na we disown it, and it's okay to disown it kung talagang hindi mo gusto. Pero pag inaral mo at nag-reflect ka sa sarili mong history, kasama dapat yon sa ikikwento mo, di ba? Maganda ang kasaysayan at importante ito pagkat we can only find the present tolerable to the extent that we actually can imagine it as tolerable in relation to the past. Kung paano natin narrate ang nakaraan ay mag-i-influence sa ating realidad ngayon. So maganda sana that if we can find historical welcome to LGBTQs in the Philippines, di ba? Kasi kung wala naman tayong puwang na ibibigay sa official versions of national history o Philippine history sa mga LGBTQ, di wala rin tayong puwang na mabibigay sa kanila sa ating katotohanan or sa ating kasalukuyan ngayon. So the past makes the present intelligible, it makes it tolerable. Kailangan meron tayong stake kung paano natin inanarrate ang ating nakaraan. Malaking-malaki ang stake natin. Hindi natin siya pabayaan. Nabayaan na lang ang mga historians kung paano nila ikikwento ang ating nakaraan bilang bayan. Meron tayo dapat say doon. Pagkat kung hindi natin maisisingit ang ating katauhan doon sa version na yon, then wala tayong puwang talaga na maibibigay sa ating katotohanan ngayon. Okay, salamat, Joey.
Ayun, maraming salamat, Neil, sa may tawag dito, napakaliwanag na eksplikasyon dito sa issue. Ngayon nga, tayo bilang mga guro ay maghahanap ng mga teksto kung paano itong issue na ito ng kasaysayan ay maisa sa leksyon. Meron tayong tatlong tawag dito, halimbawang teksto kung paano dudulog, no, gamit ang historya o kasaysayan. Nandito ang Mabitak ni DJ Eliamil. Nandito sa libro ninyong Labios ito, no? So kung hindi niyo pa papadala ito sa inyo, pwede ninyong maging resource, no? And then pangalawa, fiction yan, no? Parang yung Mabitak galing sa isang CP mula sa isang ongoing na nobela na sinusulat pa. Baka tapos naman na noong 2018 pa itong ating excerpt na kinuha. And then pangalawa yung Dibuhong Martir ni Andrew Estacio, and then pangatlo, pag-reimagine ng buhay ni Baldomero de Leon, ang pagbabanyuhay ni Baldomero de Leon ng ating manunulat na si Eugene Basco. Next slide, please, Steven. Ito yung Mabitak. Itong author, si DJ Eliamil, batang-bata. Ito yung kanyang bio note. Sinilang sa Laguna, no? Tapos pumunta ng Maynila, nag-aaral sa PUP, naging fellow sa mga workshops, ano, sa Cordillera, dito sa Amelia La Peña. And then nakapag-publish na rin. Ayan, dito siya tumigil simula nung makalahok dito siya. Gawain ng pagsulat, tuloy-tuloy na siya. No? Bakit ba natin ito napili? Hindi na natin ito kumbaga ay fast forward na talakay. Hindi ko kayo matatawag maliban lamang siguro sa next slide na masyadong maliit. So may isang CP dito. Hindi ko na kayo matatanong kasi usually ito sa klase. parang siyempre introduce yung teksto, tapos papakwento natin, summarize natin sa estudyante para maintindihan, makuha natin na nabasa nila at naintindihan yung kwento. So ako na muna yung gagawa nun, ano? So basically, itong kwento ay tungkol sa isang bata, ano ba pangalan ito? Si Jay Campos na namatayan ng tatay, tapos bumalik siya sa Laguna, tapos doon uli siya nag-aral, and then may natuklasan siya sa sarili niyang ama, no? Yun palang pumunta na ako sa dulo, no? Sa final event. Natuklasan niya na yung kanyang ama ay lover pala nung uncle niya na si Tito Paul, ano? So yun yung kwento. Pero actually, ang totoong kwento nito ay history of desire, no? Siyempre, history of desire pero personalized ito sa ating tauhan na si Jay, ano? Meron ding sa pagtalakay siguro sa klase, tutulungan natin ang ating mga estudyante sa mga guide questions na siyempre geared towards para ma-foreground ang pagka queer nitong kwento. First person, so parang ang dating ay parang chronicle, ano? Pero at the same time, ang core talaga na hinahanap ng main character ay ano yung libog, ano? Tinatanong niya kasi Filipino teacher yung nanay niya at siya ay tawag yung nanay niya ay pinanganak siya pero hindi siya umiiyak kasi parang ang tawag dito correlate ay nung nanganganak yung nanay niya ay hindi siya lumabas agad kasi yung nanay niya gusto manood kung sinong mananalo sa Miss Universe, na si Miss Kiambao, no, na para inaabangan. Siyempre tayo ay obsessed sa beauty contest at yung nanay niya isa sa mga ito. Hindi muna siya inilalabas hanggat hindi na nalalaman kung sino nanalo. Kaso natalo si Miss Kiambao sa Miss Universe, doon siya sa inis nung nanay niya, saka siya nailabas. Ang kakaiba dito, hindi siya parang medyo may element ng magic realism, ano, na hindi siya umiyak kahit paluin at hanggang paglaki niya hindi na rin siya natutong umiyak, ano. At next, tinatanong din niya sa sarili, no. Meron siyang laging tinatanong, ano, ano ba yung libog, ano? Ayan, ano. Pag-uwi niya sa Mabitak, parang history ito ng kanyang development ng isang gay teenager, ano. Parang hindi niya ma-explain, hindi niya ma-name, ano, bata kasi siya, ano. At pero meron isang part doon sa kwento na kasi meron siyang na-meet na batang lalaki, si Lando. Tapos itong si Lando, very, para siguro rin contrast ng male at saka ng gay, tawag dito, personality. Ito si Lando ay very macho, na naninilip, doon sa ilog. Implicated din yung isang diwata, no, na si Lakampati doon si Lakampati pinili, nandun siya sa parang ito yung mga sa literature, ito yung hindi naka-foreground, hindi ang tawag dito, hindi siya nakalitaw pero importanteng mga teksto, no. Parang sa madaling sabi medyo psychological yung approach, ano. Kasi Lakampati ay hermaphrodite, no, na diwata, ano. At itong figure na ito ni Lakapati ay merong importanteng papel dito sa pagbasa ng teksto na ito. Kasi sinilipan ni Lando, tapos sumama kasi si Jay dito kay Lando kasi akala niya makikita niya yung diwata. Para kasi inakit siya pumunta sa ilog Laurel. And then, nung makita yung naliligo, hindi naman pala diwata kundi isang babae. Tapos nalibugan, sabi ni Lando, nalilibugan ako. And then doon nagtanong si Jay, ano ba yung salitang libog? Hindi niya ma-explain, ano? And then ayan. And then pero mayroong isang line doon sa kwento. Pag nakikita raw niya si Lando, nag-iinit yung katawan niya at meron siyang ibang nararamdaman. Yung mga text na ganyan would pwede nating ma-impute na hindi niya naiintindihan yung libog, hindi niya alam yung mismong definition ng libog, pero nararamdaman na niya, hindi lang niya ma-identify. So ito yung mga, para kumbaga ay kung tuturo natin sa mga teenagers, ito na yung paglitaw ng eternal, patawag dito, pagdamdam sa kabaklaan ng tauhan mismo yon. Pero hindi niya rin nakatago sa kanya, so unconscious. No? So yan. And then meron doon sa dulo, meron magandang nangyari. Pinabasa niya tinatanong niya yung Tito Paul niya, kung ano yung libog, tapos may nangyari, pumasok sa bahay. Hinignan niya yung binabasang libro tungkol sa pag-iibigan ng dalawang lalaki. Tapos doon niya na-discover na mayroong dedication kasi doon, Dear Paul, tapos sa dulo, mahal kita. Tapos nakalagay sa ilalim ng pangalan, tatay niya. So, meron siyang doon sa dulo ng kwento, merong sudden awareness na yung tatay pala niya ay bakla at yun, nagulat siya, pero at the same time, alam natin na matatanggap na niya yung sarili niya pagdating sa dulo ng kwento. So, itong historyang ito ay personal, pero imputed ang mythology, ang buhay ng OCW. So isang magandang palagay ko ay magandang teksto na talakayan sa loob ng classroom. Kailangan lang talagang mabusisi na pagpapakahulugan dito sa teksto. Okay. Pasensya na, hindi ko na kayo classroom style na tanong. So next text tayo. Si Andrew Estacio Ganton, bata rin, and meron siyang halos pareho naman ng approach sa paglikha, katulad ni DJ, ay pag-reimagine ng history, from UP Los Baños naman siya, and very Catholic, inamin naman niya sa kanyang introduction, na Katoliko yung dinidiskurso niya sa kwento. Basically, ang kwento ay isang batang si Cedric, tinatawag ding Marivic, na may talent, na nagdo-drawing sa kanila sa paumbong. Merong isang mural doon, dinodrawing, siya ay talented. Tapos si Noli, yung teacher, ay parang ina-encourage siya, ginugroom siya. Tapos chinichismis na sila ng mga classmates na magjowa yata, ganyan dahil sa kanilang special treatment kay Marivic, Cedric, pero hindi may isang sa mural parang hindi tawag yan, hindi makumpleto ni Marivic dahil wala na siya ng gana, hindi niya alam gagawin. Related din dun sa pagkilala sa sarili. Pero yung teacher niyang obviously bading, ay sinabi sa kanya kung ano yung nararamdaman mong vision sa sining mo, ilagay mo dyan sa mural. No? May history kasi itong si Cedric, na yung tatay niya ay, although hindi binabanggit diretso, na biktima ng EJK, 2018 kasi ito nasulat, kasi sa ganito. At yun yung parang yung violence sa society, tapos kailangan, hindi eksena kasi revolution yung tawag dyan, dinidipik sa mural, and then suddenly meron siyang nung sabi sa kanya ng bakla niyang guro na mahal siya, obviously gawin mo kung ano yung vision na nakikita mo dito sa painting. At ang ginawa nga niya, pinaint niya yung mga revolutionaries, si Gregorio del Pilar at yung mga Katipunero. Siguro inspired ito nung Baldomero de Leon historical fact. yun yung nilagay niya sa mural. At lahat ng tao kinabukasan, hangang-hanga, nagulat doon sa painting niya. Pero at the same time, yun din nga, yung history ng Paumbong ay na-depict sa isang sa lente ng isang young gay artist, at siya ay proud doon sa nagawa niya, hinangaan naman ng kababayan niya. So ito ay isang pagtawag dito, pagre-recuperate ng history na para ito ay magkaroon ng gay value, gay perspective, na magkakasabay yung personal, historical, at community, no, para through art, no? So yan, no? So isang magandang talakayan sa klase itong mga ganitong teksto. At lalo na itong ating third text, very clear. Si Eugene, next slide please, Steven. Ayan, ito yung nabanggit kanina kay Danton Remoto. Historical fact naman ito. Next slide please. At ang ating author ay sikat na manunulat, children's literature author, very productive, ano. Ayan, and then next, the picture niya. Ayan, si Eugene Basco. Itong ating tulang tatalakayin ng maikli ay galing sa kanyang Kilometro Zero na libro, no? At next slide please, Steven. Ayan, ano. Itong tula niya ay napakahaba, in 6 parts. Ano, pinadala na yata sa inyo, no? In 6 parts, merong tawag dito, write-off. Ang activity na naiisip ko would be sa Bayang Bigkas. Medyo, pero still an effective method of making the students internalize kung ano yung teksto, di ba? Pwede silang mag-costume, pwede silang andito yung American soldiers. Ayan. Next slide please. Ayan, ano. Napili ko tong part na to kasi merong tong teksto na ito ay sasabihan ko na kayo, no. Ito kasing mode ng tulang Filipino na ito ay high, tawag sabihin doon, yung klase ng language is high Tagalog, ano. Kahit ako nung basahin ko, dami ko hindi naiintindihan. Why? Bakit kaya, no? Kasi nga merong siguro to literary background, literary history na merong isang style dito na nauso noong 1990s sa pagtula sa Tagalog na pagandahan ng termino, paramihan, ano. Isang mode dito kasi dahil Filipino teachers o kahit siman siguro sa magta-try yung mga English teachers ay ang method ay enumeration. Napakasimple, di ba? Enumeration na halimbawa mayroong parts dyan. Kasi parang ang pinanggagalingan ng teksto ay history nga eh. Paano i-recreate yung historical atmosphere ng panahon na yun. So pati yung dahil ikinas o parang ang tauhan ni Baldomero ay parang babaylan na, parang bumabalik yung imagination ni Baldomero sa past, ano. Ito yung mga nabanggit nating mga babaylan. So siya mismo ay parang, ang isang term siguro would be nasapian. A keyword, nasapian ito. Pwede rin natin sabihin nasapian na pati yung author, si Eugene Basco. And that, yung worlding ng babaylan at saka nitong revolution ay nandyan na, no? So practically this is a perfect text for history and queerness. Kasi di-review in 6 parts na ang hahaba, ano, halos 20 pages ito, ay ni-review hindi lamang ang pre-Hispanic, Hispanic, pati yung mismong revolution, forward hanggang 1940s, yung Americanization, And then babalik ulit sa past, meron parang ang main symbol is very, very queer. No? Nagsimula yung poem, hawak-hawak yung tagdan ng isang flag, Philippine flag, tapos walang tigil sa kaaalon yung flag. So it's really yung nation, yung concept ng nation nandiyan. Pero itong flag na to kakaiba. Bakit? Kasi sinapian ng rainbow, balangaw. No? Yun daw flag ay, in other words, nag-insert na may 2 minutes pa ako, si Eugenie Basco ng mga pamamaraan para foreground natin ang queerness, ang kabaklaan dito sa So yun yung umpisa niya, hawak-hawak yung tagdan, and then sa dulo, hawak uli yung tagdan na ibinawagayway. So we can see a very clear image ng historical bakla, si Baldomero de Leon, doing an iconic action for bakla sa kasalukuyan. Na dapat hindi kasama tayo sa history, very heroic, very illustrious background, at lahat ito ay pinagmamalaki ng nasapiang author. At meron isang napakahabang section dyan, talagang parang incantation. Ako si Baldomero de Leon, paulit-ulit dyan, hindi siya kriminal, hindi... So yung assertion ng identity ng bakla ay dito lumilitaw na hindi siya magnanakaw, hindi siya malupit, hindi siya bandolero, hindi tulisan, kundi isang makabayang bakla na nakikilahok sa kasaysayan. Yun lamang po, magandang umaga.
Queerness has always been around. Our history is not complete without queer narratives and representations. Just as history helps us make sense of our past, myths help us decipher the present we experience. This is especially true for queer folk, whose imaginations have found itself at home with the fantastic and eccentric qualities of myth. For our 8th module, Dr. Jhoanna Lynn Cruz will discuss how queer texts reimagine myths as a way to make sense of the queer experience while also revitalizing old wisdoms.
Good morning, everyone. I'm back. Thank you, Dr. Joey Baquiran, for opening our sessions today with such a rousing discussion of the role of history in shaping how we understand ourselves as queer folk. No? So today I want to talk about mythology. So inisip ko, bakit kaya inassign sa akin ang module na ito? Kasi kahapon sabi ni Dr. Teodoro, inassign sa kanya yung religion kasi siya, sarado katoliko, yan, religious siya. So, i-claim ko na ngayon na inassign sa akin ang queerness and mythology because goddess. Yan. Goddess incarnate. Ayan. Okay. Kunyari joke, pero totoo yan. Okay. Kasi yung project talaga ng queerness and mythology is about claiming who we really are. Kanina sabi ko sa chat, the queer agenda, whatever that means, is really for us to be treated like human beings, the human beings that we are, with the same rights as cisgendered heterosexual people. At magandang banggitin yun dahil nga International Human Rights Day today. So napakahalagang i-commemorate ang International Human Rights Day around the world because, as you know, human rights are continually being violated in countries with fascist leaders. So while it is true that we want to be treated as human, part of our agenda, so to speak, is really reclaiming our divinity. So kasi na-demonize tayo dahil dun sa yun ngang module kahapon sa religion, na-demonize ang pagiging bakla or tomboy, no, sa, or even pagiging deviant, no, as women, for instance, regardless of your sexual orientation. So we've been demonized, and we've been called witches, tapos tinawag tayong aswang, no. So mahalaga din, no, sa usapin na queer yung pag-reclaim ng ating divinity. Yan. So yan. So i-claim ko na yung aking pagka-goddess. Walang kukontra, no? Walang basagan ng trip. So the module on mythology was introduced in the Likhaan Facebook page using this publicity material. No? It says, "Myths help us feel less alone." So tulad nung kahapon, babasahin ko yung caption doon sa Likhaan na Facebook page, explaining, no, this particular module. So sabi nila, "The affinity of the queer imagination to mythology is readily understandable. Eccentric identities are usually identified and indeed self-identify with the eccentric, even or especially where the inner or the fantasy life is concerned. Mythology is a way to make sense of the world. It is a source of guidance and community. For the queer individual who is typically outside the ordinary, the fantastical and eccentric qualities of mythology can be a haven where they can understand the world and themselves. For the queer writer, reimagining myths can also be a way to speak of their experience. For the 8th module of the GlobalGRACE webinar, we will explore texts that rework and appropriate mythological material to revitalize these age-old wisdoms and to realize the queer experience." Yan. I love the way that it's put, no. I think it's from the course guide, no, that was given to you, no, mainly written by Dr. Neil Garcia. So dito sa caption na ito, no, from our Facebook page, na-reclaim na yung function ng mythology. So, but what I'd like to begin with is really how mythology has been used for the opposite purpose. Kaya kailangan siya i-reclaim. Kasi yung mythology, ginagamit siya para i-diminish yung pagkatao natin, especially women. No? So, syempre yung mga men, because of the patriarchy, yung role nila sa community ay privileged, no? So the myths that we read, no, whether it's specifically Philippine or Western myths, are they show that men are in a position of privilege and power. So this project, no, of reclaiming or what is called revisioning myths is actually something that came from the feminist movement. No? So kahapon nabanggit ni Dr. Baitan na importante sa pag-aaral ng queer material yung iugat ito or iugnay ito sa feminist movement or sa feminist theory. So, hindi naman lalabas siguro yung mga specific concerns natin as queer kung hindi lumabas yung specific gender issues ng mga babae. So, just as a maybe a background, no? So gusto kong i-reference si Roland Barthes, no? Doon sa kanyang very successful book, no? Called Mythologies, kung saan pinakita niya yung isang critical theory of myths. So he described, of course, we don't have time to really discuss semiotic theory or deconstruction or post-structuralism in our classes, especially siguro at the senior high level. But you can just, in general, talk about how myth is a second-order semiotic system. Yun yung theoretical na approach ni Roland Barthes, which means that just maybe to oversimplify it takes an already constituted signified and turns it into a signifier. So isang bagay na like a word or an image or a story is given greater meaning in a particular community by calling it myth. And so these particular signs appear natural, eternal, absolute, or frozen. Okay, so dahil nagiging ang trato sa myth ay signifier, hindi na natin siya i-question, no? So dahil ano siya, no, part siya ng, let's say, kwentong bayan or alamat or even images, no? Even I think historical events or persons can be treated as myth, no? Katulad kanina yung sinabi na si Rizal, hindi natin ma-question because Rizal as a signified has turned into a signifier, the national hero, diba? So hindi natin pwedeng i-question or interrogate kasi nga it stands for something that is eternal, absolute, no? Or universal. So may problema doon, no? Ang malaking problema pagka yung mga myths na ganyan or ay tinatanggap lang na they're received rather than read. Okay, tinatanggap lang natin as if it's natural, as if it's legitimate to treat our present context, no, our present situations on the basis of what the myths say about who we are. All right? Siguro ang napakaklaro na example, no, para lang maintindihan natin kung ano yung danger, no, ng paggamit sa mga myth bilang second order semiotic system is really, for instance, looking at our creation myths and how these creation myths define gender power relations. Kaya di ba sabi ko nga, no, it's a feminist project kasi many creation myths show women to be secondary to men. No? So yung unang ginawa ang lalaki, halimbawa yung Judeo-Christian nga na creation myth, no, from Genesis na Adam and Eve, diba? So dahil Katoliko tayo or a lot of us, no, in the Philippines were raised as Catholic or within the Christian system, na-influensyahan tayo nung story ng Adam and Eve. Na nauna si Adam, si Eva ay hinugot sa tadyang. Ang ganda nung pagtagalog, maganda siya. So, but, meaning to say, we're just a rib. No? Parang spare rib. Yun yung idea. Women were created from the spare rib, no, of man. And you were created in order to become his helpmeet. No, that's the word that's used in the Bible. So this is defined, even though it's just, a signified, it's just a story from the Bible, it has now become a signifier to represent power relations in our society. So a lot of feminist work had to do with revisioning, for instance, that creation myth. So it brought about what is called mythopoetry, or in general, poetry concerned with myths. But the project is not just to echo or repeat or what the myths say, but really to read them. So before you just receive myths, no? But now you want to read the myths and to read them by revisioning. And there's the use of the hyphen there is really quite it's deliberate. No? What's the difference between revisioning without the hyphen and revisioning with the hyphen? Or is there a difference? What do you think? Does anyone want to? Frank?
Okay, I guess I'll take a crack at it.
Nag-coffee ka, kaya ano ka, mataas ang energy.
I don't drink coffee. Anyway,
You don't? Oh, sorry.
I drink tea. But anyway,
Okay.
I digress. I guess revisioning without the hyphen seems more like an erasure, while revisioning with a hyphen seems to envision something else, something different, as if to imagine something that might be different from what we already know to be as normal or natural or eternal, perhaps.
Erasure would be, I think it's kind of parang excessive in terms of revision. No? So the word revision comes from the root. What's the root word of the word revision without a hyphen?
Revise. So
Revise, yes.
change,
so what does it suggest?
I suppose the revision without the hyphens, more like this change to, I guess, to change what is there.
So hindi natin pwedeng gawin yan sa myth, di ba? Pwede ba?
I don't think we can change the myth, but we can hyphen and re-envision the myth as something different, something else, perhaps. Not necessarily changing it, but perhaps making a new myth, or perhaps making a new myth, or providing
making it new, or what's the root? Vision.
To see it as something else.
Yes, exactly. So thank you, Frank, for offering your self to the class, as usual. So we revision by seeing anew. No? So, kasi hindi natin siya pwedeng i-revise technically. Kasi myth na siya, di ba? So, sa feminist project, of course, iba yung sa queer. Later, haharapin natin yan. But within the feminist project, ang gustong gawin is to see those myths anew, to read them and with a new lens, which is the feminist lens. So, paano ba natin pwedeng gawin iyon without changing the myth entirely, di ba? Kasi hindi naman talaga pwede. Kasi nga, ano na siya it's a given text. No? So, how do you revision or see it anew? May halimbawa, ito yung una kong nabasa when I was studying women in literature. Yung poem na From the Forbidden Tree ni Fatima Lim Wilson. Okay, hindi siya queer, pero ikakabit natin sa queer text later on. Could someone read this aloud? It's a longer poem. This is just one portion of it. Jericho.
Morning to each and everyone. The Forbidden Tree by Fatima Lynn Wilson. Perhaps she was just bored with the man of the missing rib, who was beginning to repeat himself, having run out of names for the rest of the world. Perhaps she felt a shared companionship with a snake who only sought a true and absolute wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Jericho. What do you think? How is it seen anew? What is the new seeing here? O Jericho, ikaw na kasi ikaw nag-read.
Yeah. Ma'am, I think there is because it was taken from Adam and Eve, the story in the Genesis, and we know that there is conventional take on the story of Adam and Eve, and of course the Forbidden Tree. In terms of revisioning with a hyphen, I think Fatima Lim Wilson took a different take. Hindi siya yung conventional. It's because she is already, because of the words perhaps. The words perhaps here, and she might be insinuating that baka bored lang talaga, no? Baka bored lang talaga si Eve. Kaya kaya nangyari ang mga nangyari. Parang ganun na. So parang it's not something like parang it's not something like na it is destined to be done. Parang it's not destined, pero parang paano pag bored lang talaga siya? Yun lang yung ano niya.
Kinain niya yung forbidden fruit. Bakit niya, yung parang tinitingnan niya yung intention, yung parang siguro what motivated Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, no?
Apo.
Bored with the man.
Yes.
Kasi the man was beginning to repeat himself. No? Wala na siyang maisip na names. Because what's important here is that it's the man who is given the power to name the world. No? And so that's the power of language. Pero pinanonood siya ng babae, si Eve, tapos nabobore na yung babae doon sa ginagawa ni Adam. And siguro parang medyo for me today, iniisip mo in real life, oo nga, no, pagka merong mga lalaki na boring talaga silang pakinggan, lalo na yung mga straight men. Sorry, bias. But dito sa tula ni Fatima Lynn Wilson, na pinapakita na maybe that was why. Or she felt a shared companionship with the snake, who only sought a true and absolute wisdom. What do you think that means? Even the snake is revision. Kasi ano yung original na pagtanaw natin dun sa snake? Tsaka kay Eve?
Temptation or evil.
Sige, si Mark daw. Mark?
In the biblical sense, the snake is, we saw snake as a temptation. It's an evil and thing, but here it was revisioned as a companion or someone that befriends Eve, and then Eve was, perhaps she was empowered by the shared companionship of the snake. So this is really a complete revisioning.
Yes, exactly. No, kasi doon sa lumang kwento, parang ang tanga ni Eve. 'Di ba? Na parang naniwala siya, niloko siya ng snake. 'Di ba? She was deceived and she was tempted, and parang so gullible, naniwala siya doon sa snake, napakasama ng snake, 'di ba? But so dito sa revision ni Fatima Lynn, the snake was a friend who showed Eve the potential of partaking of the fruit that would give her a true and absolute wisdom. So even the knowledge that the fruit offered, which was the knowledge of good and evil, was seen here as an absolute wisdom. It's not a bad thing. It's not shown as a bad thing to have knowledge of good and evil. Because why? Why is it true wisdom to know what good and evil is? Mark?
Ma'am, come again.
See, Mark, why is it true wisdom when you have knowledge of good and evil?
Yeah, I think that can be considered true wisdom because you are aware of both sides of maybe history, that there's truth and there's false. So I think for me, having that kind of wisdom is liberating.
Because why? It allows you to.
It allows us to what do you call that? It allows us to not just see the other side, but also it allows us to revision or to see the other side as well, to make evaluation.
Yes, evaluation means. Yes, that's it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we're looking for the word. When you have knowledge of good and evil, you have the power to decide which one you will choose. And therefore, it is a true wisdom. Kasi before they ate the fruit, they only knew good, diba? And so it's not a real choice. If you only have one choice, then and you choose that, it's not a real choice. So nangyari nung kinain niya yung fruit is nagkaroon siya ng knowledge of good and evil. And in the poem of Fatima Lim Wilson, it is defined as a true and absolute wisdom. Not seen as the fall of man, di ba? Yun yung the other way that they describe the story of Adam and Eve is the fall of man. Ayan, all right. So dito sa tula na to, merong isang nag-criticize dito sa poem ni Fatima Lim Wilson na hindi naman daw siya totoong feminist kasi by the end of the poem, the Eve is depicted still as being ashamed of her nakedness. Okay? Pero ito yung pinapakita natin na hindi talaga natin pwede siyang i-revise, di ba? Kasi given na yung story na yun. So, alam nga namang palitan natin yung story na instead of feeling ashamed, Eve suddenly celebrates that, her nakedness and nawala yung shame. Hindi pwede nating ipakita na nawala yung shame kasi yun talaga yung nandun sa myth. Right? So yun yung difference doon sa feminist na project. So for me, this is a successful revisioning of the creation, the Judeo-Christian creation myth. All right. So dito sa local mythology, meron tayong nahanap na this is a Visayan myth, no? The creation myth, yung Sikalak and Sikavay. And meron tayong mga representatives from the Visayas. Central Visayas daw ito. Are you familiar with this? Do we have anyone from Central Visayas in the room? Slevny? I saw your thumbs up. Are you from Central Visayas?
Yes, I'm from Cebu City.
Cebu. Are you familiar with Sikalak and Sikavay?
Familiar. I think this was introduced in elementary school, but I don't remember it as much. I know their names though.
Mm-hmm. But you don't remember how they were created?
I think it was from a bamboo shoot, if I'm not mistaken.
And then
that's all I remember because it was so long ago. It was in elementary school.
And what's the difference between that, Sikalak and Sikavay, and Adam and Eve?
Sa Bible, they were Adam was created from, I think it was from the sand or clay or something like that, and Eve was taken from his rib. But in this in the Visayan version, they came out of nature, like they were like chicks and eggs that they broke out of the bamboo shoot, and they were basically born from nature instead of some heavenly being creating them.
But who came first?
I can't remember that.
As the picture shows,
I think it was, as the picture shows, I think it's Sikalak.
No, the picture shows that they came sabay. No?
Yes.
They were born out of the same bamboo and they were created at the same time. No? Pagbukas ng bamboo, I think meron din yung mga Tagalog na version. So, pagbukas ng bamboo, yung si Malakas at si Maganda, di ba? Sabay silang lumabas. Pero ang ayaw natin do sa Tagalog version, talagang nakaka-highlight yung power relations, di ba? Malakas yung lalaki, yung babae maganda. So parang malapit yun dun sa Adam and Eve na mas mababa ang babae dahil kagandahan lang ang ino-offer niya. Samantalang yung lalaki ay lakas. Pero dito sa Visayan version, equal ang kanilang role dahil hindi naka-define based on what they can do. Naka-define bilang lalaki, no? laki at bai, no? So sika bai. So and they appear at the same time. And other details of this myth was that si Adam, sabi niya, ay si Adam, sorry, si Sikalak, sinabi niya kay Sikavay, kailangan natin mag-sex para gumawa tayo ng mga anak. Tapos ang sabi ni Sikavay sa kanya is, ayoko nga, kapatid kita eh. 'Di ba? Hindi mo ako asawa, magkapatid tayo, iisa ang pinanggalingan natin. So bakit tayo magse-sex? So merong ganung level ng discourse doon sa myth na 'yon. Pero eventually, yung gods, sinabi sa kanila na wala kayong choice, kailangan yung mag-multiply. So hindi tayo dadami kung hindi kayo magse-sex. So the story now grows farther out. No? And of course, hindi natin, because of the oral nature of myths and legends and folk tales, hindi natin masasabi kung ano yung original version. No? But what I just want to point out here is that we don't have to be limited. Our understanding of ourselves as men and women does not have to be limited to the Judeo-Christian Adam and Eve tradition, because we have in our own culture myths that we can examine for looking at gender power relations in a new way. No? So, pwede natin siyang i-claim, no? Bilang equality, no? Doon sa, based on the myths. For instance, like Sikalak and Sikabay. All right. So, sa contemporary literature, i-reference ko na din si Mother Goddess, J. Neil Garcia, who wrote a book of poems in 1996, no? Very early on, kasabay halos ng paglabas ng mga feminist project na Our Lady of the Carnival, na may isang section ng tinatawag niyang legendizing. No? So, it's mythopoetry, but he calls it legendizing in some areas. In some work, in the introduction, I think, of the book. So the legends are revisited, no? They're revisited, but they're not all queer legends, no? So, but we can read them, I think, as queer because the writer is gay. No? He also has a book of prose, no? A more recent one, Myth and Writing. If you're interested in studying the concepts more deeply. Dun sa ating libro na yung Lamyos, no? Dun sa Lamyos, there's a lesbian story by Reggie De Gia. And it's called Here Come the Women. So, yun yung gagawa natin ng lesson plan na dito sa class na ito. And it's a story, so I hope that some of you have read it so that we can like briefly talk about it. Na. Okay, dito sa Here Come the Women, what we like about it is that when we teach it, we are actually hitting two birds with one stone. No? Kasi it's like fan fiction. No? And inamin naman ni Regina, kaya niya sinulat ito kasi gustong-gusto niya yung kwento na Summer Solstice ni Nick Joaquin. At kayong mga Philippine literature teachers, hindi ba gusto niyo yung Summer Solstice ni Nick Joaquin? Favorite natin yan ni Turo, no? Dahil, dahil national artist, no? Si Nick Joaquin, at yung Summer Solstice, pwede siyang bigyan ng feminist reading. Although ako, I would disagree. Kasi makikita natin na yung at the end of the story, yung Summer Solstice, ang nangyayari lang ay role reversal. Okay, so the woman's power, I think, my reading of it is that the woman's power is not shown as inherent and that it derives only from making the man submit to her. Paano yun nakikita sa Summer Solstice? Just briefly. Kung tinuturo nyo ito, ano yung mensahe dun sa ending nung summer solstice? Sige daw, stop ko siya. Who has a sharing about summer solstice? Do you teach it in class? Sa Philippine literature, ano ba yung required na reading ng Nick Joaquin? Karen?
Siguro ma'am yung sa ending kasi niya, I go with you when nung sinabi niyo na it's just the reversal of role. Sorry, maingay yung bata. Anyway, kasi ma'am parang after the fiesta, it will go back again dun sa dati ng setup na yung male pa din yung dominant. Siya very patriarchal pa din siya. So parang it just happens during the Tatarin, but then after that wala na naman. Balik na naman. Parang hintayin ulit next year kung andyan na naman yung fiesta, saka na naman sila magiging superior. But then after that, throughout the year, yung dating-dati pa din na it's the male who prevails. Yun po.
Right. Yes, I agree with you. Exactly. No, na parang it's the use of the myth of the Tadtarin and the festival is ang mensahe sa kanya is just it's not the usual normal thing. It's an exception. Dahil lang dun sa the power of the Tadtarin Festival, yung the frenzy of the Tadtarin Festivals, kaya nagkaroon ng ganong reversal of roles, no? And then of course the focus is on the foot fetish, no? Kiss my foot, di ba? Parang it becomes laughable, no? So someone said in the chat, it's carnivalesque. Yeah, no? So nagiging laughable yung power ng babae kasi trivial, foot fetish. No? Nakikita niya yung sarili niyang power bilang, halikan mo yung pa ako, di ba? Parang, of course, dahil si Mama Nick Joaquin ay alam niyo na, no? May something gay doon na pwede naman nating i-reclaim later on. But what I want to point out is si Reggie Digia, doon sa Here Come the Women, not just revisions the Tadtarin myth by using it in her story, she also queers the narrative. No? So queering the narrative achieves the feminist project more successfully. Bakit? So dun sa story ni Reggie De Gia na Here Come the Women, ang characters ay lesbian. Well, hindi sila defined as lesbian. Parang sila, childhood friends. Magkaklase sila nung elementary, tapos hindi naman sila dun na-awaken. Parang nung older na sila, no, naging widow yung character, yung isang character, ano nga ang pangalan? Si Amanda. Naging widow, tapos nagkita sila ulit, umuwi siya sa kanilang hometown, sa Maragondon, and they reunited. And that's when the attraction to each other was awakened, no, as older women. So binabago niya yung narrative nung the childhood crush, no, sa queer women. Dito, older women who understand their maybe their gender identities more clearly, but are are kind of challenged, no, by these new desires arising from a new experience or an experience of revisiting the past. Yan. So i-point out ko lang just briefly one section of the story, and this is the portion where De Gia revisions the myth of the Tadtarin. Okay. So could someone read that? Who wants to read it? Karen.
Who are the saints? She asked breathless. Women who survived, women who adopted. Amanda gestured to the inside of the house. They all did. Our women ancestors are survivors. When we, as people, forgot about them, they took new forms. That's not too crazy.
Yeah, no? So dito, of course, as you can see, no, the saints in the festival are seen now as women who survived. Okay, dun sa summer solstice, and the actual festival, the actual Tantarin festival, yung saint na bida doon ay si Saint John the Baptist. No? So, iba nagbabasaan sila. Yun yung ano yung ginagawa pag June 24. That's why my name's Jhoanna. Kasi ang birthday ko June 25. So it's derived from Saint John. So the festival is yung like sa Pasig, sa San Juan, di ba? Pagka piyesta ng San Juan, nagsasabuyan ng tubig. 'Di ba? So, yung Tantarin, si Saint John ang patron saint. So, dito sa sa festival, yung they carry the statue of Saint John, and then nagkakaroon ng frenzy. Tapos description sa kanya is 3 days siya, which is reflective of the 3 stages of women. So, what the story of Reggie de Gia does is to celebrate the woman, the female aspect of the festival, and focusing on the saints not as the religious saints or the Catholic saints like Saint John, but the actual women who survived, okay, and the women ancestors who have been forgotten and now have taken on new forms, or the mythical form of the women ancestors. And so the character says, that's not too crazy. No? So in a way, what the story does is to revision it. All right. So ito yung ending. Pakibasa. I-compare natin doon sa summer solstice. So the reading strategy really is it's just a usual close reading comparative study. Would someone read the ending? O si Oli. Si Nika, nag-raise na hand. Kasi kahapon binati ko yung microphone ni Oli. Pero Nika, raise your hand. Yes, pakibasa.
Amanda smelled sweet, she thought. She brushed her lips on the exposed skin and wondered if her lipstick left marks. Then she jumped back, realizing what she had done. Amanda, however, took her hand, white in the moonlight, and brought it to her cheek and lips, kissing the palm, the fingers, and the wrist. Emilia let out a moan. That night, they felt the last burst of summer heat in each other's arms.
Yes, Lord. Woohoo! Hashtag kilig, hashtag tingle. The tingle, this story is also appears in the Tingle anthology of Pinay lesbian writing. What is the difference between the ending of Summer Solstice and the ending of Here Come the Women? How does queering the myth reclaim the myth? So kanina sabi natin yung ending ng summer solstice is just a role reversal of the man and the woman. And that it is made into a foot fetish that is only possible during occasions like the Tantarin. What happens in the story of the Gia? Anyone? Si Nika, may insight ka since you read it?
In in regards to what's happening in this scene, for me po, based on my reading na lang din po, kasi yun, um, there's this kind of liberation that in summer solstice kasi it's more of the food fetish that was exposed in there, or it was focused on there, that makes it somehow, yun nga po, no, kind of laughable in the idea that this power would only last for a day, so you make the most of it. And then in terms of this ending naman po in the Gia's story, there's this powerful event that, yes, you still make the most of it, but it's not only a one time thing. There's a sense of liberation in what's happening to the two of them, that given the yun nga, the kilig moment that is happening, um you get the idea that there's this being this feeling of being empowered, not only by the event, but being with someone that you have feelings with, in po.
Right. No, there's how the story ends is actually, it doesn't end the narrative, it opens the narrative, right? So doon sa summer solstice, parang ano talaga siya, ay yung tapos na yun, no? Isang beses lang mangyayari, tapos na. Okay? Yun na yung chance mo to empower yourself. But in Here Come the Women, the two women, both of them, are empowered by the frenzy of the Tadtarin festival and the inspiration of the women ancestors and the collective power of the feast, that brings to mind the fertility goddesses. So yun yung mga Dionysian na mga festival, all those things bearing down on this moment between Amanda and Emilia and opening them to possibilities. And so it is empowering in that sense, because you know that this story between the two women is not ending there by, holding hands or kissing hands, but actually opens. No, it opens through desire. They open into other possibilities of relationship and of empowered relationships between women. So queering the narrative is more. It doesn't change the myth. The myth is the same, but it is now not just revision but also reclaimed. All right. Ganda. So si Ian nag-raise ng hand. You want to add something?
I wrote it in the chat, ma'am. Women can draw power and derive pleasure from each other. Di kailangan ng lalaki or ng performative submission ng lalaki for the woman to feel powerful.
Exactly. No, I think that's one of the lesbian, one of the key points, no, that is made by lesbian literary theory, that lesbians are not they're beyond men. Now, because they don't really need men in their lives in order to derive pleasure, sexual pleasure, or happiness within romantic relationships, or in the families that they create together as lesbians. So thanks for pointing that out, Ian. No, the lesbian relationship in itself is actually a male-free zone, and therefore we are reclaiming the space, no, for ourselves. Okay. Okay. So there you go. Now, so just wanted to point this out, that so the difference, no, between the feminist revisioning and queer reclaiming. No, it was actually mentioned yesterday by Dr. Baitan, no, that the function of the relationship between queerness and mythology is actually the reclaiming. Ayan. Bakit may hyphen ulit? Ayan. Merong word na reclaim. Actually, ungrammatical yung re-claim. What's the difference between reclaiming and re-claiming. Sinong gustong handog ng sarili? Is there a difference? What is reclaim na walang hyphen? Mark.
Like the first thing that came to mind was when you say reclaim, it's something you previously owned that was taken away from you versus claim lang. You claim something. It's like you're making a hypothesis about something or a statement lang. Instead of reclaim, where you actually claimed it, parang you owned it before, you reclaim it. You get it back. Yeah.
Okay, so I think in terms of land, yun yung definition regarding land. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at the dictionary now. It says to bring uncultivated areas or wasteland into a condition for cultivation or other use. Parang yung sa Rojas Boulevard, reclamation area. No? The reclamation area is yung lupa kailangan gamitin siya for a different purpose. Reclaim. So that it can be the thing is to cultivate it. The other meaning is to bring back to a preferable manner of living. Yun yung to reclaim. Okay? So, pero ano yung difference sa merong hyphen? Si MK.
What I could observe po with the words, parang pag reclaim po, it is previously, it is lost and then you are gaining it again. With reclaim, nothing is lost, but you want to claim the story once again because it was somehow revised or somehow eliminated by the people, but it is always there. But you are going to be retelling the story, something like that.
All right, correct, no? So, ang laking difference pala, no? Ngayon ko lang din na-realize na dapat talaga merong hyphen. Kasi ibig sabihin nawala sa'yo. May nawala sa'yo. At ngayon, ang gagawin mo ay kukunin mo na siya, no? So, like in the chat, no? You're taking back what was lost. But what is actually rightfully yours? No? Sabi ni Leo Ben, it's really yours, but it was taken from you. And that's what happened to myth. No? I mean, taken from us in a way, no? Because maybe silenced, for instance. No? There's one way to say that the queer community has lost myth is really, first of all, we are not there. No, we're invisible in the usual myths in our community. So hahanapin natin, reclaim, not just to see it from a different light, but really reclaim it because we lost it. So in one way, we lost it by the erasure of our existence, no, in myth, as well as in history. So kailangan din natin i-reclaim, re-claim ang history. So, just briefly now, 10 minutes, tingnan natin yung mga project ng queer reclaiming. Yan. Ito, visual project. Gusto ko. You can find this, well, I gave the PDF version to the drive. So I hope that the participants will get it, but it's also available online in the website of the Southeast Asian Queer Cultural Festival. So hindi siya mahirap hanapin, no? In case gusto nyong gamitin sa klase. It's a visual set project called Diwata, or Queering Pre-Colonial Philippine Mythology, by three queer folk. No? So, si Renz Botero is gay, partner niya si Natu Santino, and then Ram Botero is a trans woman. She's the sister of Renz. Okay, so it's a family project, and they pose for the pictures. They produce the pictures and well, in post processing they add the other details. So the queering project of pre-colonial Philippine mythology is centered on the idea of transformation. So in their introduction, they write that mythology is not only concerned with creation, but also transformation. And that's where the power of queering mythology lies. No? The focusing on the transformative aspects of mythology. So isang example, dahil nabanggit natin kahapon, yung sirena. Kahapon, napaka-negative nung approach doon sa the myth of the sirena dahil based on the song of Glock 9 kung saan ang bakla ay half human, half fish and monstrous, monstrous siya. Pero dito sa project ni Ram Botero, siya yung sirena bilang trans woman at ang explanation niya ay nandito. Pakibasa yung portion sa kaliwa. Anyone? Mark?
The mermaid is an important figure for trans women, with the upper body of a woman and the tail of a fish. From the waist down, her womanhood and femininity are not defined by what is between her legs. After all, she has none.
Isn't that beautiful? The
Very
transformation,
beautiful.
diba? The transformation of the image of the sirena as monstrous. Kapon monster siya, yung bakla. Pero ngayon, dito sa queering project ng isang trans woman, the mermaid has now become a symbol of her power. That the trans woman is powerful even though she doesn't possess the vagina, because her femininity is not defined by what is between her legs. Kasi meron siyang tail, and of course yung the beauty talaga of the sirena. Pero syempre hindi naman natin alam kung talagang physically yung itsura ba talaga ng sirena, kasi hindi naman tayo nakakita talaga, But the mythic imagination supplies the information regarding the sirena. So sa atin, sa Among Us, we have a story, Hasang, by John Eremil Teodoro. And here in this story, you will have a copy in your kit. It's a long story about sexual awakening. So it focuses on sexual awakening of gays, male gays. And so dito, ito yung kanyang queering of the sirena myth. Could someone read that? Anyone? Ano yung hasang? Ano yung hasang? O yung mga Filipino teachers natin?
Gill po ng isda, ma.
Gills. Yeah, So yung gills ng isda. So dito sa kwento ni John, yung main character, the first time that he had sex with another man, na naginip siya. Tapos actually, hindi siya panaginip, bangungot siya. Na naginip siya na meron siyang hasang. Tapos, yun nga, para siyang nalulunod. Parang yung image nung nalulunod sa drum na So, pero meron siyang hasang. Okay? Tapos recurring dream siya. So kausap niya yung kanyang sex partner o yung beloved, at ito yung dialogue. Pakibasa daw, mabilis lang. Kasi time's up na ako. Come on. Sige, Oli.
Normal lang yan. Sirena ka na kasi hindi ka na virgin. Pilyong paliwanag ni Ramil. Bakit pasang? Bakit hindi buntot ng isda? Ewan ko, basta dahil bakla ka. Siguro ang baklang sirena ay may hasang katulad ng Shokoy.
Ayun, no? So dito nakita natin yung pag-reclaim, no, doon sa image ng sirena. So bakit hindi buntot? 'Di ba? Yun yung ano natin na monstrous yung half fish doon sa myth, no? The signified that has become a signifier, tail. So dito sa kwento ni John Teodoro na hasang, wala siyang tail. Sirena siya dahil hindi na siya virgin, pero wala siyang tail, meron siyang hasang kasi bakla siya, tulad ng Shokoy, no? It's you know, I mean, it's cute, no? And of course, tanong natin mamaya pagbalik ni John Teodoro sa atin kung ano ba talaga yung ibig niyang sabihin doon sa bakit may hasang ang bakla. Ayan, no? Kasi hindi naman kaila sa lahat na ang tawag ni John Teodoro sa sarili niya ay sirena. So tanungin natin siya mamaya. All right. Just to wrap it up, no, you can give, no, in your classes now an assignment, no, after this lesson on queer reclaiming mythology by queering the narrative. Okay, you can ask them to in groups, no, to explore what Philippine myths or mythical characters from their own communities might be revisioned or reclaimed as queer. Okay, tapos maganda na kukuha sa sarili nilang mga communities, no? So dito sa dahil nagtuturo ako sa Davao, ito madaming myth, no, dito sa Davao, and there are of course many lumad stories, no, that can be used for reclaiming myth, no? And one of the just as a quick note, no, meron kaming yung word na mente fuwalay, okay, from the Teduray, no, the Teduray Lumad group. They're the only, they say, no, according to anthropological studies, that they're the only group in the Philippines that actually has a word for trans identities, and the word is mente fuwalay. Okay, so interesting talagang pag-aralan yung mga local myths natin. And so the output can be 1-minute TikTok explainer videos. Gustong-gustong gawin yan ng mga bata, no? And I've seen that in my own classes, na napakadali para sa kanila na gumawa ng TikTok. Kasi meron naman na talaga silang TikTok. So, at pwede naman itong private. So, kung may concern sa data privacy, hindi kailangan i-post sa TikTok nila yung mga classwork nila. Alright. So, i-add ko lang na hindi lang mytho-poetry ang pwedeng gawin ng queer writers sa mythology. Meron din yung tinatawag na mythopoeic, from the word mythopoeia, from J.R.R. Tolkien, which refers to the production of new myth-like fictional narratives. Okay, so ito yung other option for queer writers, no? And not just, I think, not just queer, but of course, because we're talking about queer literature, it's the myth-making through the non-realistic or speculative fiction. Okay, so hindi tayo dapat magpalimita doon sa realistic narratives, kasi nakita na ng maraming writers na yung potential ng speculative fiction or ng non-realistic fiction sa pag-world build, no? So the building of new worlds. So doon sa kit natin, may kwento si Nimrus de Castro na From the Tales of Chopusa by Liu Xing, and yung si Joel Donato Ching Jacob, which is an excerpt from a second novel, The Consequence of Crossing Gazes. No? So, syempre basahin nyo, and if you're so inclined, you can use the more speculative works, no, in your teaching of queer literature. Okay, so of course, Joel Jacob is quite popular because of his novel, YA novel, Wing of the Locust, which is which has a queer hero or anti-hero at the center of it. No? So sa klase, pwedeng gamitin yun bilang, I guess, a major project. No? Kung magbabasa ng nobela, pwede natin gamitin yung Wing of the Locust ni Joel Donato Ching Jacob. Okay. So that said, of course, no, so in literature, we are given the power to revision and reclaim myths. But as you know, our lives, no, as queer folk gives us an opportunity to create new worlds every day. We do not allow ourselves to be defined by what has been said about us, by myths or history or historical versions of who we are. We are urged, of course, to reclaim our own lives by our own means of building new worlds. Thank you very much.
Myths evolve just as much as the people who tell them do. Sometimes, myths evolve first before the people follow, or the other way around. In any case, we have much evolving to do. Part of making life lovable is making sure that everyone feels loved and supported. That includes understanding and celebrating queerness and those who identify with it. For our last module this morning, Dr. Ronald Baitan will discuss how a culture of equality fosters well-being for both the individual and the community.
Alright, magandang maga po sa inyong lahat. Narinig niyo po ba ako? Share na tayo ng slide, please. Right? Ayan pong title natin. And talagang natin towards a new normal. No? Okay, dahil lahat man tayo normal. No? Please, next slide, please. I will begin this module with, as usual, a video. No? A little bit of an overview on the AIDS epidemic. Mr. Steven, please play. Thank you.
The Philippines has the fastest growing HIV epidemic, 80% of the cases, mostly men having sex with men, mostly young, who are from the age of 15 to 34 years old. So they do risky behaviors and it's unprotected.
Sa ngayon kasi yung awareness sa HIV awareness hindi pa ganun kalawak eh.
In a span of 8 years, the number of HIV cases in the Philippines has risen by 203%. HIV is spreading fastest in the Philippines than anywhere in the world. A law was signed in 2018 aimed at easing restrictions on HIV prevention, from rights of the young to seek health care to allocation of budgets for medicines and sex education. But the Philippines' policies are failing to target those most vulnerable. Men having sex with men, or MSM.
There is the law, but the teeth is not there yet.
More than half of Filipino youths engage in sex, and schools are required to teach students about sex education. But according to Dr. Vin, due to cultural stigma, the reality is quite different. And men who have sex with men, who account for majority of HIV cases, are disproportionately affected. They don't have access to the tools required to assess risks and consequences.
The Philippines has a very big issue of having sex as a taboo. Schools don't talk about sex, when in fact, you need to talk about it earlier in a child's life so that they know what to do eventually when they get exposed to it.
Napabayaan niya yung HIV ko. Kapag ginamit ko ba yung pinagkainan niyang mga utensils or pumasok ako sa bahay niya, pwede ba akong mahawa dun po or ma-acquired ko yung AIDS?
Meron kang 3 modes of transmission. So makukuha mo lang siya sa unprotected sex, sa mother to child, or blood transfusion.
Kasi po, tingin po sa amin ng mga tao sa LGBTQ is kami po talaga yung nagkakalat ng virus. Tanong ko lang po ba sa amin po ba talaga ng gagaling yung HIV?
It's not who you are that puts you at risk the HIV. It's really what you do.
First time na natutunan ko kung ano nga ba ang HIV, ano nga po ba ang AIDS, kung paano ba nahawa.
kung paano nata-transmit, hindi talaga tinuturo siya about sa school. Mga sakit na pwedeng makuha sa pakikipagtalik, hindi talaga siya tinuturo sa school.
Sa behavior yan ng isang tao talaga.
In case of Poy, it's making ends meet because he wants to support his family by doing his best to provide financial support to them. And that's a very common story for most of our persons living with HIV, because most of young men who are having sex with men are breadwinners. And it's a culture in the Philippines that young gay men or MSMs, they support their family.
Ito na ba yung mga ginawa kong kasalanan? Ito na ba yung mga bayad na ito, sabi ko sa sarili ko? Ano po ba yung mga dapat kong gawin?
Most of the stigma that we see as healthcare provider is self-stigma. It's like they're judging themselves, even before other people judge them. We need to provide counseling and empower a person living with HIV that it's not your fault.
Ito pa rin, umiiwas pa rin ako sa family ko.
Always remember na at your own pace, no? So kung kailan ka ready, kung kailan ka handa na pag-usapan iyon sa mga taong malalapit sa'yo, and then that's the only time that it's okay to share it with them.
Dito ko nahanap yung family na hindi ko nakita sa totoong pamilya ko.
That's something that I want our clients to feel, because that's what I want to feel when I'm being taken care of, when I'm sick, or I feel bad or sad or devastated. If there's someone who empathizes with me, it would mean the world.
But in a country with nearly 100,000 HIV cases, reversing the epidemic requires more than individual efforts, but structural changes to the way the Philippines' policies adapt to the changing epidemic.
1 out of 10 cases in our community center of HIV positive people are men, and 1 out of 10 are women, straight men and straight women. So that's why we need to do it and act fast, because the landscape is changing. We are starting to reach the MSMs, but right now it's already starting to actually move and transition to heterosexual people acquiring HIV. If that happens, it will be harder for us to fix this epidemic, because it's not going to be a localized epidemic anymore. At the end of the day, the private can do so much, but the most sustainable organization will always be the government.
Okay, thank you. Ngayon, dapat tayo sa overview ng session. Next slide, please. The session ito, basically, we began with a clip, on the HIV epidemic. I will discuss, as usual, key points that we might want to consider when we teach Ultima Twin and ang nataming lamyos ng mga bakla. There are 2 texts featured for this module, from Lamyos and the other book, Busilak. After that, I will add a little more, because our topic is well-being. So I will introduce you to a clip on aging, and then I'll share with you my sample activity, and of course, suggested writers in text. Mamaya makikishare ako kay Steven for that particular segment lang, and then my closing points. So let me now go to my introductory remarks on this, which you already, I'm sure, know, kasi meron naman tayong packet na ginawa ng team Dr. Garcia. When we talk about wellness, so next slide, please. Ayan, tama, yes, Okay, wellness is a very broad concept. It involves not just taking care of yourself, but this is one thing I want to emphasize. We need to examine our society and re-engineer its infrastructures to create a nurturing and life-affirming space, or spaces, for all of us, for ourselves, for our community. The coverage of wellness would include, of course, human rights. This is very important, human rights-based, activism. It's very, very crucial, in the Philippines now. Access to information, emotional and well-being, good health. We are obsessed with our bodies, body positivity, financial independence. Many of our problems have to do with class. No? Good health and access to health care. Okay. And of course, no, as I have already mentioned, no, mention ko na kanina pala, no, yung kung may human rights na na framework, dapat ipasok doon, no, talaga yung LGBTQ rights. So that's one aspect, no, of our module today. But the second one, let me go to the second key point slide, is this, no, and I think this is really the more important focus, no, today, no, how all the ideas we just mentioned translate into, literature. No, how should queer writers write about themselves and will themselves into or to writing? How does one write about the epidemic or groups of people? Okay, and challenge stereotypical notions about how one must write about them or it. Is there such a thing as queer aesthetics? Meron ba pagkakaiba ang gay writing, queer writing, Western writing sa ibang writing? This was of course asked by the feminists, no, in the 70s. How different, is women's writing from writings written by men, diba? We are looking into, and we might want to look into the psychodynamics, no, of queer writing. Why not? And syempre, no, given that the queer writers occupy a position of otherness, no, in society, no, we of course have to centralize the issue of politics. No? Why is politics important in writing, specifically in LGBTQ plus writing? Let me now share with you, okay, the lesson plan. No? Next slide, please. No? As usual, okay, identify natin yung subjects, saan ba i-apply ito. Actually, these courses, no, sa totoo lang, if you ask me, mas bagay siya sa higher level. Itong kwento na ito, dalawang kwento na napakagaling-galing. No? They're probably the best, no, in the collection. No, you have to, mahirap silang teksto. No, it's best to teach them in higher level classes. Kung mag 21st century lit ka sa senior high, make sure it's for honors class. Para sa akin, no, kasi napaka-advanced ng teksto. Komplikado siya, no? Para sa akin, ba't akma siya sa mga majors? Literature majors, higher level classes. No? Dahil ang mga teksto may binabagayang estudyante. Okay? Gano'n ba karaming input meron sila about literature? Kung wala, mahirap. No? Okay? Tapos, normally itong class session ito, or rather yung module, 3 hours. No? Part of the LGBTQ introduction. No? Ang ating teksto, of course, Ultima Thule, no? By Adrian Pescador. And, okay, ang natanging lamyos ng mga bakla by Paulo Pacolor. Okay, Pacolor just recently won, I think, no, the first prize, no, in the PNU, okay, Normal Awards for Literature. Gusto ko yung pangalan ng Normal Awards for Literature, no? Normal Awards for gender inclusive literature, because it naturalizes, normalizes, queer identities, no. Anyway, so itong ating objectives, no. Please go to the next slide, no. As usual, no. Next slide, please. No? Siyempre, kailangan alam natin, meron tayong alam ng mga... For this particular story, hindi lang siguro feminist ang kailangan alam ng mga bata. Kailangan meron silang knowledge, no, of postmodern writing, kahit konti. No? At dapat, basta advance ang kanilang critical thinking skills. No? High level kasi yung kwento. So, mas demanding siya. In short, masakit sa bangs. No? Sabi nga ng mga friends ko na intellectual. No? Masakit sa bangs ng kwentong ito. So, challenging siya. Okay, so basically, first, no, as usual, we define concepts. But we read or define these concepts vis-a-vis, the text. No? So, the concepts have to be specific, no, to the text concerned. Here, ang ating idea is well-being. No? But that's still generic if you ask me. Now, I'm looking at my lesson plan. Parang generic yan. Kailangan pang i-himay. Kailangan ba focus pa? No? Ano talaga ang gusto mong gawin? No? So lagay mo dyan queer writing, no? At in probably AIDS literature, describing the self, in the time of the pandemic or rather epidemic, kailangan ba I'm critiquing my lesson plan. Kailangan ba specific pa? No? Number 2, analyze the postmodern or unconventional literary techniques utilized in the text. If you want, you can be more specific also about these techniques, like the collage, okay, illiterate techniques, like what else, postmodern, collage, pastiche, no? Among so many others. No? Gusto mong ilagay yan dyan, pwede. No? Why not? No? And number 3, as usual, sa akin kasi ang framework, sa Baquiran framework, lagi naka-juxtapose, no? Ang aesthetics against politics. No? Kasi we have to emphasize, no? Not just only artistic, but, you know, how writers, no, interrogate, okay, notions about sexuality, about sexual identities, okay, how writers actually challenge, you know, the status quo through their works, no. And of course, number 4, you can still, of course, no, if I were you, I would rephrase that. Parang hindi ko happy pang shadow, no. So you can definitely, ang point ko nga lagi, merong laging action, no. Lagi may gagawin yung mga bata, no, to apply what they have learned. No, dito magkakaroon tayo ng contest, no. As usual, gusto ko higaw sa mga contest, eh. Kasi pansin ko yung mga bata, they love engaging, they love competing, no, or engaging rather in a friendly competition. Yan, masaya, no. Hindi away, ano, talakan na nakakatulong at may saysay, okay, at happy sila. No? Okay, so ang activities natin, syempre prior to the meeting, bigyan sila ng assignment, no, on postmodern writing, no, and kung pwede rin on AIDS literature. Tapos syempre pre-discussion in class, no, mag-video, mag-documentary ka, maghanap ka ng mga docu or clips, no. Kung yung mga bata, mas bata, if I were you, pwede mo sila bigyan ng mga ano rin, ng primer, no, on HIV awareness, mga ganon. Pwede ka rin naman syempre magbigay ng pre-test, diba? Or this fall, no? Paano nakukuha ang HIV, mga ganyan, para makita nila, no? Okay? Or you can also show video clips about, you know, NGOs doing, you know, work, no, on HIV, no, and other, you know, social problems, no, affecting the LGBTQ+ community. No, syempre, kailangan din meron tayong mga konsepto, explain natin kung yung mga konsepto ang gagamitin para sa klase, okay? Tapos proceed to the discussion prompt. After that, I will give a video just to extend the discussion, okay? And of course, lagi may assignment, no? Kung pwede sana may rubric, why not? Okay? Let me now go back, no? So how will I proceed, no, in discussing this in my class? No? So well-being, okay, and wellness, no, can be interpreted in many ways, no. Yan. Like how? No? Tignan natin, no. So may we please go to the next slide? Okay. Well-being, no, is usually, you know, health-related, no, physical or mental. No? We have to remember that the youth are at risk for many reasons. No? The lack of resources or the inability to access, you know, these resources may lead to alarming consequences. As you can see in the video, no, these kids are having many kids, no, and you can see in the video and of course in our text, no, some of these kids are having sex, unprotected sex, and they're acquiring STIs left and right. No, in the Philippines, there are NGOs addressing HIV/AIDS awareness, no, and gender awareness, no. One of which is TLF Share. No? It used to be TLF, no? The Library Foundation. Ngayon, naging TLF Share siya. In the 1990s, the Library Foundation, or TLF, would conduct workshops on HIV and sexuality for MSN, or predominantly self-identified gay men. Okay? This program, to my knowledge, still exists, no? Albeit in different forms. No? Nag-evolve na yung program. TLF has to diversify, of course, and to meet the different needs of the clients, no? Okay, and to adapt to the times, no? I think if you read my essay, I was part of that. Neil Garcia was also part of that. Okay, marami kami mga writers sa sumali dun sa TLF, no? Also, in the 1990s, no, there were other AIDS organizations, no? Reach Out and the Remedios AIDS Foundation. No, syempre, nung time na yon, we were on the defensive side kasi wala pa yung AIDS epidemic sa Pilipinas, pero we were ready, no? We had to get ready for it, no? And maganda, mababa ang kaso ng HIV cases sa Pilipinas, no, in the 1990s. No? Well-being is also about mental health. No? In this day and age, since we now have the appropriate discourse, no, to discuss mental health concerns, more and more individuals are coming out to discuss openly their mental health concerns and are seeking professional guidance. No? Our culture is not like in the West, no, where seeing a psychiatrist or a counselor or a psychologist is no big deal. Maybe it's because it has something to do, perhaps, with the nuances, in our culture. For the longest time, for the people coming from my generation or earlier, diba, if we were depressed, we would just talk to our friends, diba? Our psychologists were our best friends, diba? Or kung to sa nanay mo, sa tiyahin mo, diba? Now it's more common for the young to see, to seek guidance, and it is a good thing, At ngayon basahin din na natin, how all these problems, can lead to mental health. Ngayon lalong-lalo na lahat tayo mga mental health issues, diba? Dahil sa pandemic. Okay? Ang tanong dito hindi man lahat may access, What do these kids, to whom will these kids turn? Should they have problems? If there were no discourse for articulating mental health concerns, anong mangyayari sa atin? But we have to remember, always nga sabi ko, hindi lahat makaka-access, nung ganito mga services. Kung mahirap ka, anong meron sa'yo? Di ba? Nanganga ka na lang ba? Hindi ba? At magiging top priority mo ba yung mental health issue mo? Kung kailangan mong kumain. The pandemic has magnified our stress, and many of us are going through rough times. Well-being is also about good health, physical health. Diba? Kaya bawal magkasakit, It's about nutrition, proper diet, lahat yan, Okay? At sabi ko nga, lahat yan function din yan ng class. Sino ang meron, sino ang wala. Well-being is also a spiritual issue, or can be a spiritual issue. As we have already discussed, in Dr. Teodoro's lecture, Catholicism and homosexuality are not mutually exclusive entities. As the lives of Dr. Teodoro and Dr. Garcia demonstrate, one can be gay and Catholic. Hindi po ba? Well-being is also about legal and human rights. How many abuses do members of the LGBT community have to endure? Are there enough laws that will protect them? Does discrimination still exist? Of course, right? Are there jobs that heterosexual people think are more suited to certain genders? If you are a trans woman, what are the possibilities that you will still get into trouble because some people think that you shouldn't be entering this CR or bathroom or bar or establishment? Parang hindi na pala nangyayari yung mga yun, pero nangyayari sa bansang ito. In a country where we still have problems with the reproductive health, imagine the worst. That's the issue of well-being. Is very complex, and we have to address this as well in our classes. Siyempre, tingnan natin yung well-being ng mga bata, di ba? Kaya ba nila yung texto? Ano may trigger sa kanila? Di ba? And how do we handle it? At meron ba tayong infrastructure? Meron ba tayong mga counseling na on the side, na ready? Okay, kung yung mga bata lumapit sa atin na may problema po ako, sir. Kasi yung tiyahin ko, yung tsuhin ko, yung kapitbahay namin, okay, alam mo yun, at anong gagawin mo? Di ba? Alright? Our assigned texts today are about well-being by way of HIV, and sexual behavior, amongst the youth, as well as about how writers have expressed the issue, in their work. Let me now proceed to, AIDS literature, kasi importante, a little bit lang, on AIDS literature. The 1980s and the 1990s, witnessed the boom of literature dealing with the AIDS epidemic. Thousands were left grieving because the infection or disease, and because of the infection or the disease. And writers address this, in their works, immortalizing the struggles, of the individuals and communities that were slaughtered and or left grieving, as well as, celebrating, the courage and dignity with which lives with HIV or without were lived. This is AIDS literature, as we know. Some of the best gay fiction written then came from the anthology Men on Men, edited by George Stambolian. And some of the readings we used in our gay literature classes, then Professor Garcia and myself, came from these anthologies. And some of these inevitably tackled the AIDS crisis. Some of the best works to emerge from the late 80s and the 1990s were Paul Monet's memoir, Borrowed Time. The play by Tony Kushner, Angels in America, and the poetry collections of Mark Doty, My Alexandria, and Atlantis. A useful critical resource would be AIDS and Its Metaphors by Susan Sontag. I'm not so sure if I got the title right. I think in the title niya, Susan Sontag, AIDS and Its Metaphors, something like that. And then in the Philippines, the emergence of AIDS literature came later, because the conditions were different. The number of AIDS cases meteorically rose only in the 21st century, the last 10 years. The number, and by then the demographics had already changed, and shifted from hetero to more MSN. But what saved us is the fact that from the mid-1990s onwards, cocktails had already been developed. In the last 10 years, the meds were so effective that AIDS could no longer be considered a death sentence. Hindi ba? In terms of literary history, there are 3 key texts in the Philippines, in AIDS literature in the Philippines. This is Terminal by Lito Casal. The second is Orosa na Feel Malate by Dr. Louis Mar Langcuangco. And I say that as doctor, talagang siya, medical doctor siya. Hindi kagaya namin ng mga doktor na PhD. Siya ay talagang medical doctor. Kaya kami, you can call us professor by time. Siya talaga medical doctor siya. And of course, third is Remnants by Wango Galeaga. I'm sure that there are many others now that have emerged. And I bet they come in different forms and media, maybe as graphic novels or stories or Wattpad or on Twitter or on Instagram, Insta Poets. The text we have today, especially Adrian Picador's Ultima Twin, constitutes new writing in the Philippines. And if we are to be more specific, new AIDS writing. May I, at this point, para lang hindi na, parang hindi ko siya balikan, siguro may I, pwede pa makishare lang po, Mr. Steven. I-share ko na lang mga pictures, kung pwede, para isang pasadahan na lang. Ito, kaya ito rin yung aking mga suggested text. Para isang ano na lang, kita po ba natin? Ano po nakikita natin? Yung suggested text ko ba? Yan, yes, very good. Salamat po. Okay, so, ayan, ito yon, na kailangan basahin, bilang mga ito, Paul Monet, Borrowed Time, classic memoir talaga ito. Nakakaiyak, ang hirap basahin dahil ang daming namamatay, ang daming fear, apprehension. Okay, but it's lyrical, nakalagay dyan, sorry, nakalagay dyan, lyrical, sabi, true. Ang galing-galing. Meron siyang novel ano ba yon? Kalimutan ko na rin, katatanda na talaga. Okay, after, which I required in my gay literature class. Hindi ko na required, hindi ko kaya Ang required ko yung isa, yung novel. Next, syempre ito na yung Angels in America, sabi ko, di ba? Kailangan natin, ayan, ito yung super fabulous na play na kailangan mabasa ng lahat. Naging film siya, starring Mel Streep, okay, and Al Pacino. You have to watch this. It's a must for all of us, I cannot think of any other better play, in the late 20th century than this. Next, syempre Mark Doty, this is my favorite, ultimate favorite poet, Mark Doty. Sobrang galing, wala akong and ang kanyang poetry napaka effuse, super excessive, in terms of imagery, Atlantis. Sobrang ganda. Please check if you want to get a sampling of his poetry for free. Please go to Poetry Foundation. I repeat, Poetry Foundation, type Mark Doty. At may mga libreng tula doon no, na ma-access nyo. At makita nyo talaga gano'ng kagaling si Mark Doty. One of the finest, okay, poets, no, America has produced in the late 20th century. And of course, in the Philippines, no, in terms of age literature, ang pinaka-nauna talaga is Terminal by Lito Casahe. Okay, late 80s pa yon, no? At if I'm not mistaken, late 80s, no? At ito, si Lito Casahe pumanaw siya last year, no? Not because of AIDS or anything, ha? Cancer, no? He was our associate at the DNS Creative Writing Center, no? At memorable yung play niyang Terminal. And I'm happy to note that it's now available, okay, it's now available on Lazada, no, or Shopee via Duty Press. So, baka gusto niyong bilhin yung mga libro ito. Okay. The next one, of course, in terms of age literature in the Philippines is Orosa na Phil Malating. Sabi ko nga, Dr. Louis Margang Campo, no? 2006 or 205. Ba nakalagay? 2006. No? Okay, yan. Magaling magsulat din. No? Nakakatuwa din. May flair naman, no? Si Louis, no? Medyo anthropological daw ang kanyang ano, pero you have to read this, no? It's an important novel, no? About the AIDS, no? About that life, no? In the Philippines, no? And of course, syempre, another Alasalian poet, no, and writer, no, Remnants, no, by Wango Galia. No? Hindi ako sure kung available pa ito online, no? Pero why don't you check it out online? No? At may study siya, ha? Pakipon sa inyo. Ayan, no? May study siya, no? Ni John Limar, Centeno Toledo, no? Wango Galiaga's Remnants as contributing to Philippine HIV/AIDS literature. Okay? So, yun lang po, no, ang aking sharing. No? At syempre, siguro segue tayo sa new literature. No? Ano ba talaga yung, para isang ano lang, isang sadahan na lang, no? Yung kay Pacolor naman, no? Ibang klase magsulat, di ba? No? And to me, no, his writing, no, is reminiscent, no? Yung ganyang aesthetics, okay? Or politics, no? As a writer, aesthetics politics, or transgressive aesthetics, ay reminiscent, no, of Jean Genet, no? Okay, so pwede yung tignan, no, ang website na yan. Okay, Google mo lang, I think Grove something, no? Ito yung mga libro niya, no? Palakihan ko kaya, para hindi ata kita, no? Malabo ang mata ko, no? So hindi ako sure kung gaano kalabo ang sa inyo. Okay, ayan. Ang ganda ng mga cover, no? Pero tignan po natin, colorful, no? Kakaiba siya mag-isip. Kasi sa totoo lang, sino nagsabing dapat tayo lahat pare-pareho mag-isip? Di ba? Isa yun sa mga takeaway dapat natin sa klase, no? On queer writing. Siyempre, no? If you ask me in terms of intertext, no? If you want to read, no? Unconventional text, no? Or a different kind of writing, no? Na talagang iba-iba, no? Lahat ng mga modernist techniques and perhaps postmodern techniques, sama-sama, ito ang ultimate model ng queer writing. Ultimate. Nothing else can beat this canonical text. This is where we will all go back to. No? Betrayed by Rita Hayworth. No? Yung batang ito ay mahilig manood ng sine. No? At nakakatuwa kasi iba-ibang ano eh. Lahat inform niya iba-iba. No? May report, may dialogue as a chapter. Makikita mo yung Kipigador, di ba? Yung mga techniques niya. Okay? Pero our great forefather is Manuel Puig. No? Manuel Puig. No? Puig si Danton Puig always say, hindi Manuel Puig, ganyan siya. No? So, Manuel Puig. Siyempre, no? In the Philippines, or in the Phil-Am literature, no? The one who did it the best, no? Was R. Zamora Lynn. Rolling the R's. Classic din yan. No? That's already 25 years old, that novel. No? Kailangan basahin natin yan. Merong article si Garcia on that. Pakicheck lang po online. No? Ang ganda-ganda itong mga bata naman to, mga kids sa Hawaii, no? Na walang ginawa kundi magmaldita. Nakakatuwa ang mga bata, no? Yan, no? At syempre, huli na, wala na. Yan yung mga pwede natin tignan, no? Ng mga kaalyadong teksto, no? Nung mga works, no? Ni Pescador, no? Particularly on AIDS, and si Pacolor, no? But especially with regard to Jean Genet. Okay? So, balik na po tayo sa aking slide na para tapos na itong sharing ko. Balik po tayo sa aking slide. Sa aking PPT. Okay, salamat. Stop na po ako. Ayan. Okay, ano po tayo, no? Yes, ayan. Okay, so, nawala yung aking, dali lang po, nawala yung aking, just a sec, no? Nawala yung aking, ayun. Gusto ko lang, nawala ako, no? Okay, so, ayan. Okay, so, tapos na tayo sa ating tour, no? Of queer or LGBTQ writing para malinaw sa atin sa nanggaling itong mga tekstong ito. Okay, so let me now go to queer writing. No? Bago tayo dumako, no? Doon sa actual discussion, no, ng dalawang teksto, no? And of course, I'll focus more on ultima thule, no? How would a writer address issues involving personal issues like trauma, rape, molestation, contracting HIV, and so on? No? Is there one legitimate way of writing about these themes and issues? If there's one, is there one perfect form for all these concerns? Of course, the answer is no. Two questions that we might want to think about. If you are a queer author exploring AIDS in your work, does your work need to be sentimental? Does it mean you have to follow the good old plot structure involving conflict and resolution, where at the end everyone is reconciled with his or her family at deathbed, or we are accepted back into our family from which we had been estranged for so long? Ano sagot po natin? Pakilagay po sa internet, no? Lagay po natin sa chat box. Okay? Do you believe that, that the work needs to be sentimental? Do you agree it has to be sentimental? It has to have a happy ending? What do you think po? Maybe we can post your thoughts, no, on the chat in the chat box. Pakilagay lang po natin, no? Mag-participate po tayo sa ating diskusyon, no? Pwede po ba? Maglagay po tayo? Yes ba or no? Yun simple siguro muna, no? Yes or no ang ating mga sagot. Ano po ba? Okay, inom lang po ako ng tubig, no? At gusto ko marinig, no, ang inyong mga kuro-kuro, no, ang kanyang mga pananaw. Pwede po ba mag-may post sa atin, mag-volunteer, maglagay? Magkatawag kaya ako. No? Pero mas maganda mag-post muna tayo, please. Sana wag tayo mahiya, no? Dahil mukha lang akong impacto, no? Mukha lang akong maldita, no? Pero mabait po ako, sabi ni Lord. Okay? So, pwede po tayong mag-share ng ating mga thoughts, no? Sa chat box. Okay? Kailangan ba ang happy ending? Kailangan ba sentimental ang mga text? What do you think? I think, of course, these are rhetorical questions, right? Okay, so habang wala pang gusto mag-post, no, dun tayo sa second one. If you are a writer talking about queer youth, no, should you leave out the unsavory details? Unsavory, quote-unquote, huh? Okay, and show your queer characters as good-natured, God-fearing, church-going saints like Dr. John Ireneo Teodoro? Of course, the answer is no, right? Queer writing, no, by virtue of its anti-normative, anti-establishment context and politics, it's one big challenge for writers to seriously consider all available writing tools and techniques out there, and ideally, if possible, to push us towards a new clearing. After all, non-conventional lives also deserve non-conventional forms, right? By virtue of their otherness, queer writers are also encouraged to write differently. No? While conventional forms still work, by all means, yes, no? Queer writers are welcome to and must push the definitions of the new, the queer, in the genre we call queer literature. New forms, new experiences, new worlds, new writing. And that is what the two pieces today demonstrate. A different way of exploring the life of a person living with HIV, and a different way of showing the lives of LGBTQ youth. No? Yun po ang ano. So, yun aking simple introduction. So ngayon, ang tanong natin, no, sa inyong lahat, no, meron po bang nagbasa ng kwento? Sana po mag-participate tayo, no? Huwag po kayo matakot sa akin, no? Meron po akong halos, marami po nakapatong, hindi nyo nakita. Marami. Sobrang dami. Nagiging triangle siya, no? Nagiging cone. Anyone would like to say something and would like to share his or her or their views about this test? Of course, I'm using the singular they, no? For the non-binary. Okay, so meron po ba tayo na gusto mag-share ng kanilang mga puro-puro or views about the text? Sino mga nakabasa na ng teksto? Anyone? Pwede po bang makishare tayo? Sino po nakabasa? Ayan, dali lang ha. Meron pala mga nag-post, hindi ko nakikita. I'm very sorry ha. Okay, ayan. Meron bang nakarelate sa ayan. Salamat. Meron ba bang nakabasa ng teksto? Meron ba? O wala? Baka gusto mag-volunteer, no? Mag-share. Okay? Sumakit ba ang ulo ninyo? Nabinasa niyo yung teksto? Nahabaan ba kayo? Na-allergy ba kayo? Okay? Sabi niyo, pandemic na, super stress na. Wag na. Tsaka na lang. Tapusin na natin. Dahil syempre, torture, hindi po ba? Okay? I can commiserate with you. No? Kasi talagang, para maintindihan, ma-appreciate yung teksto nito, talaga, kailangan mo talaga ng, particularly yung ultimate wing, no? Kailangan talaga ng effort. 100% effort. No? Okay, pero ito na, tingnan natin, no? So, sige, kung wala muna, magsasalita muna ako, ha? No? Not that I want to hog the discussion. Ayoko mag-appear na know-it-all. No? Dahil hindi naman. At pangalawa, syempre, kailangan talaga sa classroom, no? Na may espasyo yung mga bata. Diba? Minsan maganda rin yung silences, konti, no? Kailangan ng room to breathe, no? At kailangan pag may nagsasalita, huwag tayong interrupt ng interrupt, diba? May ganyan akong tendency minsan at talaga, tama na, no? Kasi hindi talaga dapat, no? Kailangan pagsatain ng mga bata. No? Let them speak out. Okay, so, dito, sa tekstong to, no? Siguro bago ko pakita yung ating mga questions, tignan natin, ha? Okay, imagine nyo, no? Na meron kayong exam, no? At yung mga tatanungin ng teacher mo. Na basic naman, no? Tignan natin, no? So, ano muna? Discuss. Then conventional. I wouldn't even say unconventional. No? Parang napaka-peg naman nun. No? So, pinipeg naman natin. No? Discuss the fictional techniques or strategies. No? Utilizing the story. At syempre, when you do that, lalabas na postmodern siya. Di ba? Yung bricolage, pastiche, no? Elitry, okay? Fragmentation, self-referentiality. All these techniques will come out. No? Analyze the main character. No? Discuss how he is dealing with this condition. No? Kasi kahit naman postmodern ito, no? Meron self, no? That is being written in the text. No? Discuss the significance of the title. Bakit may ultimate wink? Ba't niya ginawa, kinreate si ultimate wink at si Divaspora? Okay? Examine that story's treatment of HIV or AIDS. How does the use of postmodern techniques, no, enhance the politics of the writer or the vision evident in the story? Ito talaga yung more synthesis na, no? And of course, last, no, how does the text gesture towards new LGBTQ writing in the Philippines? No? Tingnan natin ngayon po yung excerpt. No? Tingnan natin. Maiksik lang naman siya. No? Pwede po at this point, hindi na ako papayag na wala magbabasa. No? Kailangan may magbasa. No? Sino kaya ang gusto magbasa? Pwede po ba mag-volunteer? Makiparticipate man po tayo. As I've said, magkaka-reward kayo. No? At ano yung reward na yun? Hindi galing sa heaven, ha? Necessarily. Kasi sabihin ko sa klase ko, no, na, okay, sino gusto magbasa? Okay? You will get your reward. Okay? In heaven. Tapos nag-ano ko, if heaven exists. Ganyan sabihin ko, no? Kasi sabi ko sa kanila na you have to do good simply for the fact that we as human beings must do good. Hindi ba? So, okay. May nag-volunteer pala dito, no? Unahin po natin ngayon muna si Frank Tamayo, ikaw yung nauna kong nakita. No? Pwede pong basahin natin yung itong ultimate wink excerpt. Sana malinaw, no? Okay. Focus please. Curtain.
My story begins. It begins with, all right, of course. Just why in the hell should you call me Ultima Twink? That first, the tragic backstories and full melodrama can wait. But don't you worry, ma'am. We'll return to the tried and tested formula soon enough. Everyone wants to resume normal programming at at mm, at Charo.
Charo, yes.
At Charo, myself especially. Whatever the hell that means, but you see, Ultimate Twink in the code name for is the code name for my superhero alter ego. Really, Ultimate Twink spelled out in bold rainbow font. Skinny, limber, hairless, the last baby power bottom any zaddy will want. Not that there are no twinks that top. I certainly don't want to reinforce that heterocentric stereotype, nor do I want to confine his entire sexual persona to just that. But among the twinks that bottom, I am the absolute best when I am him. Ultimate twinks powers include the flexibility of an Olympic gymnast, self-lubricating orifices, total muscle control, and no gag reflex. Oh, and super speed and flight and super strength. Those two, of course, sure. Ultimate twink.
Ay, naku, ang ganda ng reading. Thank you very much, Mr. Tamayo. Ganda, no? Ganda. Perfect. Okay, so anong gagawin sa klase, no, to discuss it? No? Diyan pa lang sa first, yun lang sa excerpt natin, kitang-kita mo na, di ba? No? What is evident, no? Just from the excerpt, you will see, no, a very complex and good handling of the language, di ba? Which is what literature is all about. Okay, and then there is self-irony, no? The persona, the narrator rather, is self-ironic, no? Poking fun at himself, no? Self-referentiality. He knows that he is talking about something, you know, and talking to kunwari to Ate Charo. Okay, the allusions are complex, di ba? Only a highly educated person could have written this piece, no? Kaya siya mas katabang reminiscent of the modernist pieces. Diba? Ang daming allusions galore in the text. No? Kung hindi ka edukado, paano makilala mo ba sila Hemingway? Diba? Or yung mga writers diyan na ina-allude na at pinapakalaman niya yung lingwahe, no? Hindi lang Hemingway, meron pang queering ng speech, no? And then the blurring of genres. Ito ay fiction, pero ginagawa niyang script, no? Ginagawa niya marami, may confessional, merong graphic novel-ish, may mga panels, okay, may mga picture na isa, no? Tapos iba-iba, no? Okay? So the genre, the idea of genres is blurred, and that all goes back, of course, to, you know, Manuel Push, no? And of course, self-reflexive persona. At take note dito, pag alam niya gasenti na siya, biglang he will stop, no? Alam niya pumreno, alam niya itimpla ang kanyang emotions, no? Take note also, no? This is kind of a confessional that doesn't want to confess, that refuses to confess, and yet manages to confess, and then holds back. So may mga ganung siya, no? Pwedeng lang po, pa-focus lang po sa text, no? Yan, tama. So yan, no? Yan, ganda, no? So, di ba makita natin, di ba and then there are you will see in the text of procrastinations. No, he wants to say something, he wants to share something with, you know, his friends. But does he get to? Parang J. Offit proof ka, hindi malaman, pero no, it ends in a question, no definite endings. No? It's a very complex of the psyche. No? Pero hindi ito yung hindi ito stream of consciousness hindi ganun The self is revealed in a different fashion. At yun ang nakakatuwa sa teksto. Diba? May humor, may irony, may campy elements. Yan ang kailangan natin na-explore sa teksto. Kaya talagang medyo, no, mas masusing pag-aaral, no? Okay, the I's disintegration, or how the self keeps itself whole, okay, is an important thing to consider. No? Fragmentation, is it there in the text? Tignan natin, no? Why create Ultima Twink and diaspora? How is hate dealt with in the text? Is there self-hate? How is he coping with this condition? Is hate or anger redirected or projected or displaced? What are his conjectures about how he got infected? And how are these reimagined through pastiche and bricolage and other techniques? Diba? So, yan ang natin. So, talagang maghanap tayo. Ano talaga? Ano ba yung pastiche? Ano ba yung bricolage? Ano ba yung, di ba? Yung improvisation, lahat yung mga ganyan. No? Borrowing from different writers. Okay? Mixing artistic styles. Lahat yan, papasok yan dito sa tekstong. Okay? Napaka-random ng iba. No? Yung malabas sa teksto. No? Okay? At syempre dito maraming commentary on popular culture, ino-okray niya. At merong meron siyang alam mo rin yung class ng character na ito eh. No? Alam mo uppity yung hindi man upper class siya, pero yung kanyang knowledge medyo high level eh. So ano yung kanyang attitude towards the others. Pero okay, ito yung bata na na very very intelligent at nagal-bar hopping, okay, at into sex, no? A lot of sex. Pero ang galing-galing pagkakalahat ng kwento. No? Ito yung gusto kong sabihin dito eh. No? There are so many ways of dealing with HIV. Hindi kailangan iyakan. No? Dahil pag binasa mga buti, nakakaiyak yung kwento. Okay? May umiiyak. Pero hindi pinapakita na gulgol. Walang ganon. Alright? So let me now segue to ang katangi-tanging lamnes ng isa pa rin naman fabulous text to, no? And I would like you to focus on, the fabulous handling of the language. The characters are the so-called parang baklang kana. Alam mo yung mga typical na, di ba, hindi yung mga saintly John Emil Teodoro, no? Or yung mga intellectual Neil Garcia, no? Ito yung mga baklang kanal na mga teenagers na parang aalain natin na pariwara ang mga buhay. Sex grinder, okay, meetups, at nangungulekta ng mga STI, ganun ang kwentong ito. Mga madungis ng mga bakla, no? Okay, na laging may threat ng STI. Pero of course, conscious sila sa STI, take note. Kaya nga sila nagpapatest. No? Should we idealize and sanitize our reality? For whom? Look at how the text shares with us, no? The conglomeration of various bakla and trans identities. It deals with sex roles and gender roles. No? I want to share with you the next, can you please go to the next slide? Excerpt lang ito, no, from, habang nadi-discuss ako, next slide po tayo, please. Okay, put tayo na, move natin ang ating slide. Ayan, ayaw po so, ayan, no, pwede patigan po natin yung next slide. Let's show, an excerpt from ang nataang lamnos. Actually, next 2 slides na, no? Kasi lang na akong oras now, sabi ni Lord, no? So check lang natin. Okay, habang nag-ano tayo, so yung mga questions na gusto ko ipalabas, no? Diba? Siyempre, kailangan natin tignan, no? You can comment on the characters, no? And how their characterization interrogates, no, our notions of the bakla, no? And discuss how the story succeeds as a story. Kasi, and then you can focus on the transgressive qualities of the text. No, you can of course be more specific about them. No, and then you can critique the story's vision of carving a space for queers and other identities. Can we please go to the excerpt? Tingnan lang natin para lang savor lang natin yung excerpt, no, nung kwento. At syempre ngayon meron naman tayong volunteer na naman. So sino po ang gusto mag-volunteer, magbasa? Okay, meron pang gusto? Technical people, can you please tell me sino ba yung kasi hindi ko makita, no? Sino ba yung pwede natin tawagin? Okay, sino gusto magbasa? Meron na ba nag-volunteer, darling? Meron na? O wala pa rin? O may nahihiya ba? Baka pwede po tayo magbasa? Okay, this is a Filipino text, no? Ang ganda-gandang Filipino. Baka may gusto mag-volunteer. Kanina merong isa nakita ko kanina na nag-volunteer. Baka may gusto mag-volunteer ngayon. Okay, pagkapalain kayo, okay, ng universe. No? Sino po ba ang gusto magbasa? Okay, ayan, si Maria Isabel, ibasa po natin, no, ang excerpt. Salamat po.
Okay, good morning po. Pa-color ang natatanging lamyos ng mga bakla. Nagalis ng kondom si Sen pagkayari at niyakap siya ni Herman. NSA, no strings attached ang nakalagay, pareho sa profile nila, pero parang may nagtahi sa kanila ng walang kinalaman sa pagsang-ayon sa kung alin ang alin. At natawa sila dahil doon lang din nila nalaman ang ibig sabihin ng no strings attached. dahil nabasa lang nila galing sa iba at dahil nabasa, akala'y natutunan pati. Parang kung ano dapat ang kilos. Kilos babae ka ba? Hindi dapat o kilos lalaki. Yun dapat. Parang itsura. Itsura mo dapat macho, kung ano man yon, hindi lalamya-lamya, kung ano man yon. Kung ano man ang puke, kung ano man ang titi, dun sila parang nagkasundo. Pero tinanong na rin ni Herman, paano yung titi mo? Pababaliktad mo ba? Hindi alam ni Sen. Hindi ko alam. Pero hindi dahil hindi niya alam, alam niya. Hindi ibig sabihin nun, hindi siya sapat. Sapat ka para sa akin, Sen. Sapat ka kahit hindi ka pumili ng alin. Tingin ko mas maaalagaan siguro natin tayo. Hindi tayo magsasakitan pag alam nating sapat tayo. Hindi dahil doon. Hinalikan siya ni Sen. Hinahalikan naman siya ni Sen kahit wala lang.
Okay. Ito yung isa sa mga lamyos moments ng teksto. Ang ganda-ganda, di ba? Mga pariwara, mga bakla, pero alam mo yun, ang ganda-ganda ng teksto ng to, no? At syempre, if you look at the passage, no, it deals with sex roles and gender roles. Pag femba, kailangan bottom. Di ba? Yun yung mga ganun mga ano, no? Napaka-simple yung mga details. No? At take note, no? Syempre, I think, since we talk about violence and everything, no? We talk about these things, no? Sex is risk. Sex is a potential site of violence. No, go back to the Labiban discussions. Diba? How many queers get mobbed, held up, beaten, robbed, or killed in these cases? That's why we have to conceive of queer spaces. What are queer spaces, and how does literature function as queer space? How does literature create queer space? And you can talk about that in this text. But look at the title. No? How does the title seek to startle us? Ang natatanging lamyos ng mga hindi ba? Okay. Next slide, please. No? Gusto ko makita natin yung hindi pa color. Last na to na ano, no? Last na, no? Pwede pong pakibasa lang. Sino gusto magbasa, no? Para may participation tayo, no? Huwag nga sayangin ang ating mga laway ngayong maga, no? Precious yan. So, meron po bang gusto mag-share? Magbasa? Sinong gusto? Tech people, pwede pong sabihin sa akin sino? Ibulong sa akin sino yung ano, sino po? Hindi ko kasi makita masyado. Ayan, si MK. Nakita ko tama. MK?
Google Chrome.
Pakibasa po.
So, if you happen to have queer, bakla, tomboy, trans sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, a young queer bunso, do not be afraid of them or who they will become. Do not change them, for if you do something might get broken. If you do something might get broken that will take a lifetime to mend. They are not broken and they are fine. And be kind to them. Please be gentle and sincere. And if some unwavering belief or some trauma was inflicted on you by that terrible belief, and that is somewhat stopping you from being kind and gentle, don't take it out on them. They're children, for fuck's sake.
Diba? Pakibasa po natin, no, yung text ni Pacolora. Ang ganda-ganda, no? No? Ang galing niya magsulat, to be honest, no? At ito, alahanin po natin yung kanyang message, no? Importante yan, no? Okay? Yung in your own words. Meron siya sa packet natin, no? In their own words, no? Where I come from. Maganda tingnan niya para makita niyo yung konteksto, no? Where the writer is coming from. Because we always come from specific sites and locations, no? Our articulations are tempered, influenced, informed by these sightings, no? Okay, so let's go to so many issues, no, are hounding the LGBT community: violence, money, history, and memory. How do we forget? How are we made forgotten? How are we rendered obsolete? Family is very important, diba? And that's of course where violence begins. Unfortunately, for most of us, myth is vital to our existence and to our understanding of our place in the universe. In a world where we are subjected to erasure and rendered unimportant, we have to stake our claim. LGBT individuals will always redefine what a family is. They create their own families. But sooner or later, friends will pass on or pass away. And you will be left alone. How important is financial security to old people, cisgender, transgender, queer or not? No? What can you still live for when you have seen the world and has seen everything that is beautiful disappear too quickly, like the flicker of a light switch? I would like to share another dimension to our discussion today, aging. So magpapakita po ako ng 2 minutes lang po, no, ng video ng Golden Days. No? Kasi isang aspeto yan na importante sa ating mga queers. No? Play po natin ang first 2 minutes ng video. Hindi na 4, 2 na lang po. Please. Thank you.
Mahalaga ang araw na ito. Kailangang paghandaan. Ang iba sa kanila ay nanggaling pa sa malayong lugar para dumalo sa isang bihira at espesyal na pagtitipon. Hindi pinalampas ni Noelito, Rica at Rolly ang isang fundraising event ng mga estudyante ng UP Manila kung saan ang may ibebentang Valentine ornaments ay idodonate rin mismo sa kanilang mga matatanda. Bihira na kasi silang magsama-sama ng katulad nito mula nang magkawatak-watak sila halos 3 taon na ang nakararaan. Sila ang Golden Gays ng Pasay City.
Never na nakatempt kasi.
Noelito ang tunay niyang pangalan pero kung minsan Helen kung tawagin ng kanyang mga kaibigan dahil kahawig daw niya ang artistang si Helen Gamboa. Sa isang barong-barong naninirahan ngayon sa Noelito, isang pamilya ang nagmagandang loob na kumupkop sa kanya.
Kailan ka napadpad sa Maynila?
1965.
Tagal. Bakit ka napadpad dito?
Kasi yung kuwang ko, magulang ko, mama ko yung namatay. Tapos yung mga kapatid ko, ginaaway-away ko. Pinapaaral nila ako. Nag-aaral ko pero minsan layo pinapalo. Ganda. Yung sasakyan nila ako, umalis ako, lumayas ako.
Naging problema ba yung pagiging...
Okay, salamat po. No? Start na po natin ng video. Pasensya na po, no? We have to cut the video, no? Kasi pasensya na po kasi we have in the interest of time. But please watch this video. Nakakaiyak, no? Sobra, no? And so I will let my students watch this para lang bas anong kayo ng konsepto ng wellness, no? And or well-being, no? And so ang ating activity ito, no? Can you please go to the next slide? LGBTQIA+ speech writing competition. No? So ang question nila, no, how can we as individuals and citizens of this country, to locate it, no, use ultimate wink and lamuse to help make the Philippines and the universe a safer and better place for members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Your speech should run ideally for about 1 minute. Word count 180 to 210. Importante yung word count hindi malayo. Kasi pag ginamang 150 to 210, 30 words, 50, 60 words will matter. So kailangan ang word count mo very, very specific lang. No? Kung sa mga pwede, kung ikaw ay pwedeng gawin mo 200 to 210. Para yung mga words, no, ng mga bata, pare-pareho lang. Para gano'n, no? It must, at syempre importante yung rule na basahin na yung teksto. And they must directly engage with the assigned text. Kahit na gano'n pakaganda yung speech, no, na pro-LGBTQ, kung walang evidence, no, of critical reading and engagement with ultimate wink and lamuse, hindi papasa. Okay, hindi mataas, papasa naman syempre, pero hindi mataas ang grade. Kailangan talaga balance, no, of textual criticism, critical thinking, reading of the text, so grounding, and yung connection, no, going beyond the text, no. It must be empowering for LGBTQIA+. And for women, lagi ko ina-add din yung women. Kasi maraming women, no, hindi naman hetero, di ba? Hindi lang cisgender, no, lesbians, lahat na paulit lahat ng issues about women, no. Okay, so ang ating criteria for assessment, no, your speech must possess the following characteristics. It must be LGBTQIA+ affirmative intent. Sabi sa kanila, kung ang output mo ay homophobic, transphobic, okay, hindi tayo magkaibigan, ha, for this particular exercise. Okay, it must be able to draw ideas from the text, no? It must be grammatical, whether it be in English or Filipino or in any other language they want, as long as perfect grammar, no? It must follow the word down. And in fact, gusto kong ilagay dyan extra na lang kung mayroong flair sa language. Okay? So, ang next natin, so last few points na po, no? So, yung ganon, no? So, based on my experience, no? Yung mga bata, they deliver. At masaya yung mga, I wish I could post one of those award-winning pieces. Hindi ko nakakuha ng consent but I am so happy. As long as you give them input, no? They give you fabulous output. Okay? So next slide, please. Patapos na po ako, no? Closing points, no? Ito yung mga writers natin, di ba? So I'm now going to my last few points. No? Literature, queer literature is about many things, no? The third volume rather, of Histoire de Sexualité, or the history of sexuality of Foucault, is titled The Care of the Self. Queer literature is about the care of the self. And you will see this through various perspectives or optic lens: family, violence, faith, religion, class, culture, history, love, pride. At the center of it all is a story, a narrative. What story are you going to write? From whose perspective will you tell that story? Your story. We write to tell our story, or our stories like no other, because they are distinctly ours. I will end with 4 important insights. No? We write without apologies, no? Based on the text of Pecador and Papalor and all the other brave and outstanding LGBTQ writers. We write without apologies. We write to affirm who we are. We write to challenge norms and narrow-minded ways of looking at things. And I'm not just talking about bigotry. I'm also looking at, limited conceptions of literature, because we have to look at literature as evolving, okay, every day. And there are always new forms and new ways of representing our reality or realities. And last and most importantly, we write to reclaim our space and to create new spaces of possibilities. Ako po si Ronald Baitan. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat. God bless.
Putting love and acceptance at the center makes for healthier communities that build each other and the world around them. Love goes a long way. We are now opening the floor up for questions, so we are calling on Dr. Janiel Garcia to facilitate the discussion.
So, magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Wow, a very, very fruitful morning, second day of our seminar. Sadly, it's our second and also our last day, and it's clear that this conversation needs to continue. I've asked our technical staff, particularly Cyril, to ask or to offer to you the option of constituting yourselves into a private Facebook group. Kasi yung experience namin in our writers' workshops and residencies, our fellows and resident artists have continued their fellowship with each other and mutual support system through social media, and we can help set that up for you. We will also be part of it so we can continue this conversation. I just want to give you that, offer to you that option, no? Kasi pare-pareho tayong mga guro, pare-pareho tayong nagmamahal sa panitikan, at pare-pareho tayong interested sa equality. At itong mga ito ay mahirap na gawain at hindi natin, kahit na meron tayong seminar na 2 araw at napaka-full ng ating schedule, hindi natin talaga magagawa lahat ng dapat nating gawin. Siguro it will take months of mutually conversing and exchanging tips and know-how so that we can actually get ourselves going, no, in the right direction. Hindi tayo nakakapag-synthesize kasi lagi tayo nauubusan ng oras at wala na akong panahon na i-synthesize lahat. Kahapon, Professor Jhoanna Cruz took over facilitating the Q&A kasi I had to do something for my sister. But I was able to watch naman the actual session, na na-miss ko lang naman yung last hour niya. And I have some takeaways now from the from the sessions from yesterday that I want to just very briefly mention now para maalala natin, ano. Yung first two modules ni Professor Baitan, ang pinaka parang gusto kong matandaan ninyo ay yung kanyang idea na to teach queer literature is actually to take a political position and to make an ethical and political commitment. Na hindi siya lamang, hindi ka pwede talagang magturo niyan with conviction kung wala kang firm commitment to the agenda of equality, di ba? At maganda na lang na nasa DepEd mandate na rin na ang pagtuturo ng panitikan sa senior high school ay dapat gender inclusive na. So meron na tayong footing in the actual bylaws of the Department of Education para gawin ang dapat nating gawin, no? To bring the queer content into our reading list and into our syllabi. Ang gusto kong sabihin pa tungkol sa module si Professor Baitan na hindi talaga na-articulate ay if we remember what he did, he actually unpacked, no, the different concepts and theories that we need to know so that we can teach queer literature with authority. So you have to actually you have to prepare, no, to teach queer literature, and that preparation means doing some studies, no, and familiarizing yourselves, no, with the presuppositions, no, of queer literature. At napakaganda ng ginawa ni Professor Baitan kasi klarong-klaro he laid the foundation na, no, for the kind of conceptual overview that you need to possess in order to teach properly queer literature. So teach with authority and teach with conviction, no? Yun yung parang takeaways from Professor Baitan. From Professor Jhoanna Cruz's module on the family, gustong-gusto ko yung point na communicate niya na we may have been born into families, meaning we have no choice about the matter, but we can actually make our own families, no? Kung hindi mo gusto ang pamilya na kung sa sinilang, pwede kang gumawa ng sarili mong pamilya. Well, nothing should stop you from doing that, no? And maybe an alternative word for family is friendship, no? Kasi yun talaga naman ang best friends natin dapat ang mga members ng family natin, no? And pag best friend mo, hindi mo sasaktan, meron kang responsibility for that person, etc. I also love the fact that she stressed the point that we are the ones who should tell our own stories, no? So yung naging question about straight actors taking the roles of queer characters in film and in theater, for example, it's really a question of job equity. Pareho kami ni Professor Cruz ng position diyan. Hindi magkakaroon ng incentive na mag-out ang maraming closeted queer actors and performers kung alam nila na pag naging out na sila, wala naman pala silang makukuhang mga roles. So kailangan natin talaga yung roles na nandyan na at merong ng available scripts sa kanila na ibigay kasi para lang dumami yung representation talaga at mas maging viable ang career ng isang out queer actor. Now, yung naging modules kanina, siguro I want to summarize the two modules, no, mythology and identity, kasi parang mythology and history kasi pareho naman silang involved in the same thing, which is the telling of powerful communal stories. History is a story, and mythology is also a story. And actually, the story of the nation is myth, di ba? Myth-making ang nationalism eh. At religions are also myths, no? The broader concept is myth, the smaller subset is religion. Okay? And I want to quote Stuart Hall, ang ganda-ganda ng kanyang sinabi. Sabi niya, identities are the names we give to the different ways we are positioned by and position ourselves within narratives of the past. So napaka-importante na meron tayong positionality in regard to the past at doon natin makukuha ang ating sense of identity. Myth-making is important for the queer project, Pagkat myths are powerful stories, and they're also social technologies that bind people together. You think of any kind of powerful social movement, at the heart of that movement is a myth. It's the story that people all believe in, subscribe to, and do not question, di ba? And it provides their ideology. So myth is almost a synonym for ideology. And we need to have a myth, no, in order to move forward with any kind of advocacy that we have. So meron tayong pinopromote talaga na queer myth, the myth of queer beauty. Ako, the myth of queer superiority. Bakit hindi? Yun naman ang pinopromote na heteronormativity, straight superiority. Eh di ating tumbasan siya ng queer superiority at tignan mo naman, nagaganda naman at superior naman talaga. Di ba? Ang maraming mga queer creatives, no, at queer writers and scholars, no. So it's been a very fruitful second day, and I am now opening the floor to questions, no, and I'm sure marami tayong gustong tanungin. Pwede tayong humingi na ng permission from our monitor na bigyan tayo ng additional 10 minutes para hindi naman tayo masyadong mag-hold sa oras, no? So we will part at around 12:10 kasi ngayon medyo quarter to 10 na, quarter to 12. So we will have 20 to 25 minutes of discussion time. Sino po ang gustong unang magtanong? Kung meron po tayong queue na, wala pa ako nakikitang pangalan, no, sa chat box ng queue. Meron po bang katanungan ang ating mga participants? O another takeaway pala yung sa napakagandang module ni Professor Baitan. What is well-being? It is simply a full and abundant and fruitful and happy life. Ang hirap-hirap noon, di ba? Kasi parang you're asking for everything na. Well, let's reach for the stars, di ba? Let's go. Let's aim really high. We want a full life. We want a happy life. We want an abundant life. Okay? For everyone, not just for queers, no, but for everyone. Because we cannot be happy exactly if other people are miserable, di ba? So it has to be a collective sort of like general vision of well-being. It cannot just be for one sector. Okay? So meron tayong una, si Jhoanna would like to say something. And then, yun pa lang. Okay, Jhoanna first.
I have a question. Actually, partly na-answer mo na dun sa, sa additional point mo about wellness. I just want to ask Ronald, kasi yung presentation niya, sa literary portion, parang all gay. And also in terms of the focus on the relationship between wellness and HIV/AIDS, parang nakalimit siya sa mga gay experience. Do you have any insights about, let's say, wellness among lesbians?
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
And trans persons.
Hindi talaga hindi ako sorry yung aking I was thinking at it parang medyo nag-focus sa gay, no. Pasensya na po kasi yung texto kasi dalawang medyo gay, no. Yung more gay kasi yung texto, no. Now regarding the LGBT the other, no, actually yung trans identities, no, meron siyang kasi dati, di ba, problematic actually MSM na category, no, kasi syempre ang problema in terms of reaching out, no, or addressing the issues of women, no, and of course trans. Hiwalay yan yung women, pero ang women may variety, di ba, may mga lesbians din, iba rin ang kanilang mga needs, di ba, so yan ang isa sa mga kailangang i-address. Hindi ako ganun ka-conscious, pero alam ko may mga NGO naman, no, addressing their needs. Yung trans, isang problema yan, kasi kung ang trans iyahanay mo kasama ng mga MSM, no, like yung mga sex workers, hindi naman, di ba? Because these trans women are women, di ba? So may mga so initially hindi karon ganun, I think, problema, pero ngayon na yan, parang klaro na talagang they're catering to the needs of the transgender individuals, no? So yun yung mga ganon, no? So the NGOs are quite advanced, no, in their work, no, particularly on HIV. No? At maganda, dapat lang, no. Now regarding sa mga sa writings, also I want to mention, no, na kasi talaga medyo recent ang trans trans activism sa Philippines, no. Even recent, pero nahuli siya kumpara sa sa lesbian and gay activism. No? Tsaka yung discourse lumabas siya, 21st century. No? In the West, was Lesbian Striker, yung mga nauna, nag-compile ng mga anthologies. I'm happy to note na meron tayong na trans scholars talaga na we can be proud of. Si Dr.
Mikey.
Si Mikey Inton Campbell was happy now. And then, because we deserve to be happy, right? As queer people, no? Dr. Mikey Inton Campbell, please read her works, no, on queer cinema, particularly the relationship between the bakla and the trans. No, number one. Number two, meron si Dr. Jaya Jacobo is also doing trans theory. No? Hindi pa ako nakakita ng kanyang mga publications, no? Pero online, no? Isang napaka-productive. So ang ganda na lumilipad na ngayon ang ating trans, no? Meron din hatang mga trans men, no? Neil, meron
rin.
So ang maganda, meron ng diskurso for them, no? At sa literatura, medyo konti. Kasi unang-una yung how do you dissociate, no, or disentangle or unpack the dichotomy trans man and lesbian, di ba? Yung mga ganon. And how do you distinguish the bakla from the trans, di ba? Ang solution dyan ni Mikey Inton is di ba? You have to look at trans from the optic lens of kabaklaan, di ba? Which also resonates with the ideas of Professor Garcia. So ang ganda-ganda ng field, napaka-exciting. Sorry po hindi ko nasabi itong mga ito kanina, no? Kasi akala ko meron akong 2 hours eh. Yung pala 1 hour lang.
Kasi paumanhin po sa ating lahat pagka talaga pong short ang ating time, no? Kaya nga po ina-encourage ko po na mag-participate po tayo sa ating Facebook group at doon po natin itutuloy ang ating pag-uusap. Ang gusto ko po tawagin sunod ay si Christopher, to be followed by Frank. Ayan na, we have a message from Rona. The Facebook group link will be given to us later. Kindly just approve or confirm that invitation to be in the link. And then we will continue our discussion and our mutual helping of each other. We will help each other. Mahirap po ang ating sinimulang journey ngayon, no? Para po baguhin natin ang sistema ng pagtuturo ng panitikan sa ating mga departamento. Tutulungan po natin ang isa't isa. So hindi po matatapos ang ating tulungan sa seminar na ito. Ito po ay simula lamang. Alam po natin, ang daming dapat i-discuss pa. Yung intersections na in-identify namin, ilan lang, 12 lang. Diyos ko, saan laksa po ang intersections, di ba? Kung isipin niyo, ang dami natin napapansin na parang kulang talaga, di ba? Yung discussion ng class, napaka-rich at hindi natin talagang mako-cover with these texts alone. Okay, let's ask Christopher now and then followed by Frank.
Hello po, magandang umaga po. Narinig po ako?
Yes.
Okay po. Actually po kahapon, kinausap ko na po yung isa kong katrabaho, pati department head, na kung pwede kami mag-thematize ng susunod na semester sa pagtuturo ng Philippine Literature ng Queer Lit, no? Ayun po yung plano ko sana, kaya rin ako dumalo sa seminar na to. Plano ko na every semester may tema yung aming Philippine Literature na pagtuturo. Tapos, ang naging concern po niya, may pinagbabatayan po kasi sa CHED na curriculum guide, no, sa college. Maging sa senior high din po siguro, mayroon din curriculum guide na pinagbabatayan. Lalo't yung mga estudyante po kasi yung mga eduk, nakukuha ko ng mga board exam, no. So, syempre may mga kailangan po silang matutunan sa literature, sa Philippine Literature na klase. Ang concern po nila ay baka lumayo daw po doon sa original na pinaprescribe ng CHED na curriculum guide at nilalabas taon-taon sa board exams and maging sa national achievement test ng mga senior high kung sakali mag-thematize kami. So how do I convince them na okay lang mag-thematize po ng queer lit sa Philippine Literature in college?
Okay. Pwede ako muna sumagot na very interesting at kung kaya nyo i-pull off yan, bongga kayo, di ba? Alam ko magkaka-resistance yan pagkat may mga canonical authors tayo na hindi natin pwedeng isingit naman within the queer description at i-etsapuera sila. For example, yung mga napakagagaling natin mga writers ng mga kababaihan, sila Edith Tiempo, sila Kirima Pulutan, sila Hilda Cordero Fernando. Pero actually, lumabas tayo sa Lamyos at Busilak at yung mga na-publish na ng mga works, meron talaga rin pwedeng maipasok ng mga national artist works na queer pa rin. Pagkat may mga kwentong sinulat itong mga national artist na ito na queer. Okay? So, yung Aura, pina-plug ko na yung libro, Aura, nagsulat ng mga kwentong tungkol sa baklang character, si Edith Tiempo, si Hilda Cordero, meron ding kwento inspired by Pitoy Moreno, nakalimutan ko na yung title, High Fashion. Si NVM Gonzalez, yung kanyang novel na The Bamboo Dancers is actually about a gay character. Alright? Si Nick Joaquin, yung Summer Solstice niya is a gay story actually, no? Na baklang-bakla ang depiction, lalo na yung very theatrical ending na nilalabas na yung sakong ng paa niya at pinapahalikan dun sa lalaki na gumagapang, di ba? Talagang bading na bading. At bading din yung yung description ng procession ng mga lalaki compared sa procession ng mga babae. Si Amanda, yung description niya very nakakadiri, di ba? Nung nagkakaroon ng sexual sexual trance, no? Hindi na turn on si Nick Joaquin nung iniisip niya yung kanyang female characters na nagse-sexuality display. Pero yung posisyon ng mga lalaki, grabe ang description niya, parang turn on siya. Ganyan. So pwede natin din isingit ang mga works ng canonical authors at within the queer paradigm. So makakatulong tayo diyan, no? So tanungin natin yung iba, baka meron silang suggestions on how to go about that.
Sa akin naman ito, no? Kasi ako I used to be chair, no? So department, I'm administrator. Sa akin ang aking approach diyan is we need to do, curriculum design, curricular planning, curriculum design updating. Kasi yung argument nila, baka raw ganyan. Editing natin yung curriculum. Diba? And we have to weigh those, we have to check the curriculum exactly, and we have to meet halfway. Diba? Ano ba yung kulang? Diba? Kagaya sabi ni Professor Garcia, pwede mo naman isama pa rin ang queer agenda. Diba? Using canonical works. Number one. Number two, kasi kung literature yan, ano ba talaga ang focus? Is it information-based? Na kaya na yung mga writer? Or about reading practices? Diba? Ano ba itanong sa board exam? Diba? Objective ba yon? Okay? Na mabilis naman talaga bigyan ng solusyon, di ba? Or kailangan talaga ng pag-iisip, no? Na talagang critical thinking. So, kailangan tingnan din yung mga skills na i-develop. No? Sa akin, ang unang gagawin lagi, ano yung policies in place and how do we actually, turn them upside down? So yun siguro ang sa akin muna, no? In addition to what Professor Garcia has mentioned. Thank you.
Jhoanna may have a suggestion also coming from her experience in UP Mindanao, no?
Yes, I agree with both your points, and especially with Ronald's points about curriculum design. Kasi sa UP Mindanao, we have every 3 years we review our curricula. So requirement siya yung sunset review, and then we revise. So I think panahon ngayon ng pagre-revise, no, ng mga curriculum dahil nga sa chat box may nagsasabi na pwede na mag-allocate ng 3 hours per semester for discussion of God in all their subjects in their school. So, pagka merong ganyang bagong policy, kailangan talaga mag-revise ng curriculum at mga syllabus. And so, that's a great opportunity to revisit the canonical works, the so-called canonical works that we teach in our Philippine literature classes. And also yung sa DepEd na sinasabi, kailangan ng gender-inclusive literature. Yan ay invitation para mag-revisit ng mga curriculum. So, siguro, tama naman yung impulse ni Christopher na mag-suggest na thematic approach to the Philippine literature subject, pero baka masyadong nakakabigla, no? Kailangan kasi siya tingnan in the context of the whole curriculum nga, hindi lang sa isang subject. So siguro hinahinay, no? Hinahinay, pwedeng i-supplement ang mga queer text doon sa existing na mga syllabus habang ginagawa yung mas the bigger project, which is curriculum design. So yung suggestion ni Neil na give queer readings to the canonical text. That's one option. Yung mga symptomatic na readings of text. Tapos sa akin, personally, yung ginawa ko dun kasi nagtuturo ako dati, hindi na ngayon, na gender and literature na class. Dati yung mga queer text, nilalagay ko siya sa dulo ng syllabus kasi parang build up to queer kasi yung mga basic na mga gender, mga feminist, ganyan, na text. Tapos pagdating sa dulo, yung queer, na-realize ko sa pagtuturo ng subject na yun, na pag nasa dulo siya, wala nang time pagdating do sa dulo. So, hindi na siya nadidiscuss sa mismong klase ko. So, nakakaya naman, di ba, sa sarili ko na hindi ko dinidiscuss yun. So, ang ginawa ko, nag-revise ako ng syllabus, nilagay ko siya sa gitna instead na sa dulo. So, sigurado na matitake up siya. So, these are interventions, the queer interventions that you can do in your own classes while you're waiting to do the big curriculum redesign.
That's wonderful. I think let's stress that point before we leave this question na hindi lang naman the queer affirmative project of pushing queer text authored by queer authors ang ating dapat isipin, kung hindi yung the queer project also of queer reading of any text. Okay? Especially important canonical ones. Diba? So hindi naman porque queer ang parang gusto mong interest for that thematic interest for one semester, hindi mo na i-discuss yung mga works ng canonical authors. Pwede, pero titignan mo yung kung paano yung mga works nila magre-respond to a queer reading. Diba? So pwede pa rin yun. I would probably go the path of easier resistance or least resistance by saying gender readings. Para matanggap-tanggap muna ng papaaralan, di ba? At ng komunidad. At syempre, kung gender malaki yan, pasok si queer dyan, pero hindi mo siya talaga ginagawang, hindi siya yung cutting edge, trailing edge lang siya, pero mako-cover mo rin siya. Tama yung ginawa ni Jhoanna, nung tinuro niya yung kurso na yun, pinasok niya sa gitna. Pero may broader perspective na gender, di ba? Para mas maraming ma-capture. And hindi rin masyado magre-resist yung community kasi gender, everyone likes it now eh. 'Di ba? I'm sorry ha, everyone's going on the gender bandwagon, 'di ba? O diyan po nakasakay si queer.
Pwede mag-add niyo? Gusto ko lang i-add na para mabilis, just para i-add lang to what you said, Ako, gagawin ko comparative. Look at what Dr. Jhoanna did kanina, 'di ba? Kinumpare niya yung isang teksto na canonical, at iaan mo ng queer, queer reading, queer rewriting, queer reclaiming. Ganun siguro medyo sa position, para pasok siya. Basta bilis gawin yon, I think, but that's more doable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. Okay, now we have Frank. Pwede last question na rin si Frank kasi 12:05.
All right, I guess my last question, or the question is, I'm wondering about the ethics surrounding writings about HIV from those that are not particularly positive, or pause, in short. I'm wondering about that. How do we go about those writings or the ethics behind that? So it's kind of related to what we were also discussing yesterday, but I guess this is a little bit more specific.
Siguro let's appreciate that question within what we heard from in relation to what we heard from Professor Cruz. Now we are the ones who should tell our own stories, no? So I think, Frank, ideally we should let the posies tell their own stories, diba? But it doesn't mean that if we that just because you're not yourself positive, you cannot actually sympathize with their situation and write fictively about their situation. Siguro yung options na lang, if you want to write about a subject position that you do not personally occupy, is you probably should not appropriate the first person sort of like narrative point of view. You probably would want to talk about that story from your own point of view, no? Meaning you're the friend of someone who's posy. There are options like that. I know may ethical concern, may ethical issues yan talaga rin eh. Ako hindi naman personally nilublob sa drum ng tatay ko, pero nagsulat ako ng tula ng baklang nilulublob sa drum. Kasi nagkaroon ako ng moment of self-identification. Ang totoong occasion ng tula na yon ay nung nagpunta ako kasama ang pamilya ko sa Star City or Boom na Boom ba yon, isang carnival, at may nakita kaming isang dunking booth na merong very loud, potty mouth na bakla na tinutokso niya lahat ng dumadaan na i-dunk siya. Siyempre, bibili ka ng bola para i-dunk siya, di ba? Actually, ang daming nagda-dunk sa kanya, but I was sad for that person. So, ginawan ko ng tula. Dalawa yung naging tula, companion, ano siya, yung conversion, yung isa, yung passion and selfish love in a carnival na hindi masyadong nag-fly, pero parehong idea of getting dunked. I think that within the feminist experience itself, women felt they could actually tell the stories of other women. No? Like, let's say middle-class women were actually telling the stories of women who did not come from their own class, but they were still able to do that. I think we call that sympathy or cross-identification. May ethical questions dyan, no? But I would probably encourage you to actually use the different tools you have as a writer in order to register the awareness that you are in fact simply cross-identifying or sympathizing rather than appropriating someone else's story. Jhoanna might have something to say kasi malaking experience ang feminists dyan sa tanong na yan.
Si Ronald na lang.
May I say something? Ako lang,
AIDS.
magandang, ang ganda ng question, no, Frank, no? Sa akin, importante kasi talaga, tatlo self-reflexivity. Every time we write, we have to know where we are coming from. Diba? And we don't want to encroach on other people's space. Pero, and if we do, no, we have to write with empathy. Diba? From a position of empathy, number one. And number two, since we are all artists, okay, from the position of of a craftsperson, no, from someone who knows, literature can only work if it is sublime, right? So kailangan yun yung hamon sa ating mga writers. If you want to write about other people, make sure you know, your politics. Make sure you know where you're coming from. Make sure you write it well, no, and make sure that you write with empathy. Hindi ba? Yun po ang sa akin. Salamat.
Jhoanna.
I think magandang halimbawa dyan sa the writing about the HIV or AIDS with empathy would be Ultima Twink. Kasi sa pagkakaalam ko, hindi naman positive si Adrian Pescador, pero nagawa niya. So pwede siyang gawin, no? Yung sinasabing writing about it with self-reflexivity and empathy. On the other hand, yung writing ni Carlo Bacolor is really based on his authentic experience of being HIV positive. So we are already writing our own stories. So I think hindi siya poproblemahin na there's a dearth of works to pick from.
Yes. Okay. Magandang question. No? Ethics is really a very important thing to consider all the time, no, when we create. But I think that fellowship, solidarity, cross-identification, they are part of the movement. And I think within that description of solidarity and fellowship, we actually can more or less sympathize with each other, identify with each other, and help each other by telling each other our own stories, no? Telling our collective stories in a way. May claim naman tayo to a queer collective suffering eh. So hindi naman tayo completely alien from that, no? So if you're queer, except you're middle class, meron kang point of contact with a queer person who's lower class. Diba? Meron yun. May point of contact yun. Hindi yun completely different world, no? So, all right. We will continue this conversation. It's time to take a break, refresh ourselves, and we will see each other in an hour and a half. I think let's turn over to the VO now and to wait for instructions. Thank you very much. That was so wonderful.
Thank you for that insightful discussion. This morning has shown us that embracing queer narratives actually benefits all. We are, of course, having a lunch break before we proceed with the last 4 modules. We will be back at 1:30 p.m. for our afternoon session. If you haven't followed Likhaan and GlobalGRACE on their social media accounts, you may do so through these links. Again, happy lunch, everyone.